Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Sebastian stood outside the entryway, smoking nervously. Today he was supposed to tell his mother about his fiancée's upcoming wedding, but he had a gut feeling that the conversation wouldn't end well. His mother rarely ever chose not to take his side, but in the case of marriage, it could easily turn out that his mother would not consider his opinion at all. She thought it was too soon for him to get married, and in general, that it shouldn't have bothered him until he was 30. Sebastian himself didn't really want to get married, but he had a plan, and this plan had to be followed strictly. Otherwise, he would work as a loader or laborer for the rest of his life, or until his body parts fall off. Tired from physical labor, he couldn't make up his mind to go into the entryway. Once he got in, up the stairs, there would be no turning back. And so much he did not want to go to his mother now, that he even had the thought of letting her go right now and telling his mother about everything sometime later. But mother was a very touchy person, and he knew that if he did not tell her now, and she suddenly found out about everything later, she would be very much offended. And to have someone like Miranda as an enemy was costly. Choosing the lesser of two evils, he gathered courage, spit on the asphalt, threw the cigarette butt into a small trash can. He entered the entranceway, climbed the stairs, literally jumping over several steps. "Oh, Sonny," exclaimed Miranda, who was very happy to see her son. She did not know that Sebastian had come to tell her that he had decided to start a new family. And all this time, he had been hiding the fact that he was in a relationship. She smiled languidly, literally bouncing around him. And he, realizing that sooner or later his mother would find out about everything, smiled crookedly, trying to hide his true emotions, among which was fear. Regardless of how his mother would react, he would have to take this step, because otherwise his plan would be unrealized. And who knows when he'll ever get that opportunity again. Maybe never. "You sit at the table. I just finished cooking. I wish you'd said you were coming," Miranda said, starting to set the table to once again please her son, whom she missed so much. He was now a rare guest at her house, and she tried to show him that he was welcome here. "I have come to you with news," he said, stretching his wide mouth into a smile. Sebastian was not handsome at all. He had a blocky build, short in stature. His facial features were large. Perhaps he could even be called handsome, but managed a slight hump from a fracture. As a child, his lips were naturally plump and his mouth was wide. His eyebrows and eyelashes were light-colored, and at a certain angle it looked like they weren't there. Sebastian popped homemade cookies into his mouth, watched his mother fussing, and thought he would like a wife like this, one who ran around, fussed over him cooking, fulfilling his every whim. But at the same time, he could find more interesting entertainments on the side, knowing that his wife would forgive him if everything came to the surface. "I've got a little news," Sebastian said. And then he hesitated. The woman looked at him with interest at her son, but apparently tried not to react to him in any way. Maybe because she didn't want to know any news, or maybe because she had already guessed what he would tell her. Though he wouldn't have guessed it himself if he were in her shoes. He was hardly what you'd call a womanizer, so she was more likely to think about work, moving, anything, but certainly not a wedding reception. "Well, tell me if you've got news. I don't think I'm going to be very happy about it." "Yeah, if there was something happy, he would have told me right away," said Miranda, who knew him like the back of her hand. Sebastian hesitated. Mother was right. If the news was good, he would have told me over the phone, not wanting to drive to the other side of town. And he was getting married. "The date's already set, so I'm not changing anything," he said. In his mind, the phrase sounded insistent and firm. But when he spoke, there was no trace of it. His voice trembled at the most crucial moment, when it seemed he should have announced to his mother that he was to be married. Instead, he practically prolonged the information like a frightened child. "Is that a joke now, or what? Why, kids nowadays don't have to ask their parents' blessing anymore, no. Or how do you have it now? Your sister, when she was getting married, she told me everything. And when they first met, and when he proposed, everything was as it should be, you know. And you've got it all out of whack," Miranda said in a disgruntled voice, who didn't approve of her son hiding his own attitude from her for too long. "But I knew you didn't approve, so no surprise," said Sebastian, rolling his eyes. There was silence. It was hard for the woman to accept the fact that her son was simply hiding his relationship from her, and instead of sharing this joy with his mother, had chosen to confront her with the fact. She didn't expect him to. She considered it an insult. There was no point in arguing with her son, because Sebastian didn't know how to apologize. "Well, if you've decided to get married, since your mother's opinion is completely irrelevant to you," said the woman. Omri shook his head negatively. "Mom, stop it. That's why I didn't tell you anything." "Really? Enough of that when Micah is coming there?" asked he, wanting to change the subject to his sister. "She's supposed to arrive today. Any minute now, she'll probably be happy to hear that you've kept your whole family out of your own future. So, is she really worth it to do this to us?" "I don't know, son. I didn't expect this from you. Have I ever said a bad word to you?" "Well, sometimes we fought, but everybody fights. We all do. But that's no reason to just take me out of your life," the woman said in a disgruntled voice, deciding to shame her son. But there was no shame on Sebastian's face, and he didn't care. He had done his job. He said everything and let the mother deal with her own emotions. He had a plan, and if he didn't stick to it, he would soon be left with empty pockets. The door opened, and his sister's disgruntled voice was heard. Lisa, walking into the apartment, was always indignant because, as always, she bumped into both of them and her brother. It was a situation they had had since childhood. But now her grumbling was courtly, and upon seeing her brother, she immediately rushed to hug him. "So you knew I'd find you here, cunning bug. How did you know I was coming today?" she asked, hugging her brother. Unlike her brother, Lisa had inherited the best features of her parents. She was short, slender, possessed light blue eyes, thick chestnut hair. She had correct facial features. Her appearance was pleasant. If, looking at her brother, one could guess about his unlikable character, her appearance spoke eloquently that she was a kind, sympathetic, good person. Looking at Lisa Sebastian at the same time, it was very difficult to believe that they were brother and sister. Can you imagine? He was going to get married, and he didn't tell us anything. He knew we'd react badly, you see, the older woman said in a disgruntled voice, deciding to tell her daughter at once how cruel Sebastian had been to them. Miranda looked so disgruntled that it was embarrassing to even look at her. She looked at her son, shaking her head, pressing her lips together. "I think this is all a bit too much," said Lisa, looking at her brother. "Did you really go out with someone and not even bother to tell us? Are we strangers to you?" Lisa never hid her emotions, and now she looked as upset as she could possibly be. She really hadn't expected her brother to be so cruel to her, and she wasn't happy that she'd told him everything at the time, and even things she shouldn't have told him. She had been the first to tell him that her husband had proposed to her. She was the first to tell him that they would soon be husband and wife, and it turned out that her brother, in order to repay her for her gullibility, simply decided to hide from her the whole relationship. "Why are you two reacting like this? It's my life. I can marry or not marry. What's the problem?" Sebastian exclaimed unhappily. He really didn't want to discuss or talk about anything right now, and he thought that even this notification to his relatives was more than enough. Sebastian could not tell that his secrecy was due to the fact that he feared his mother's reaction. He wanted to marry the daughter of an oligarch with a disability for the sake of money, but he was afraid that his mother might reveal his true character in front of his future wife. In front of Kelly, Sebastian was always so romantic, wonderful, as if it was all that mattered to him. But in reality, it was acting, and his mother would bite right back. That there was no sincerity in those words. "Okay, I'm sorry for bringing you into my life. Next time, it will be a lesson to me that you should not trust me," Lisa said grudgingly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, let's get offended at me for nothing," he said grudgingly, his face expressing anger rather than annoyance. "And I don't think you care about me at all. I'm your own sister." "Well, I didn't tell my mother. I was worried." "But what's wrong with me?" Lisa asked. Sebastian from her only waved away the woman who stood in the kitchen, and now, closed on a chair, sat down with the children at the table, had rather contradictory feelings. On the one hand, it was, of course, joyful in her soul that she was finally near her children. She should have been happy that they were sitting together, chatting, that they were doing well. But all she could think about was that her son had betrayed her, and that this betrayal did not suit her at all. He should have told her. She should have been aware of what was going on in his life. And he just ignored her. "Okay, let's just let it go. Seriously, let's just let it go. At least she's a nice girl." Lisa asked, not wanting to exacerbate her relationship with her brother, who was becoming more and more distant lately. They used to be close as brother and sister, spending a lot of time together and never being strangers to each other. Now it turns out he's been a stranger to her for a long time. "Yeah, but she doesn't have an arm. She has a prosthetic. I just didn't think you'd like it. Well, now that it's all out in the open, I've decided to marry her. I asked her to marry me, but she doesn't want a wedding. Maybe we'll have a quiet celebration, or maybe we'll just sign the whole thing," Sebastian said, picking at his plate. "So it's not enough that you didn't say anything to your family, but now it turns out that you'll see or you won't organize any celebration for us at all?" Disgruntled mother asked. "I didn't expect that. I don't know anything about you. I thought I had really raised good children. Turns out the son has turned into a rat. Like in Cinderella, remember when the carriage turned into a pumpkin? So do you, but just an obnoxious, snarling animal." Sebastian rolled his eyes. "And if the mother holds a grudge, then everyone will have to watch her dramatize it now." And how she put on daily demonstrations that were in lieu of punishments. Lisa immediately rolled her eyes at her mother's words this time, because she knew that her mother would stop at nothing now and would constantly hurt Sebastian for months to come until the resentment inside her melted away. "Mom, are you going to keep resenting him? That's enough. Whatever he wants to do, let him do it. He's an adult. And besides, I think he's sorry he did that to us," Lisa said, wanting to resolve the situation. But Sebastian wasn't sorry, although he nodded. Apparently, he wanted to pretend that he really felt regret. "Your father would be very disappointed in you," the mother said, as the children were on their way out to the balcony. Sebastian was angry with his mother. He hated it when she said that. But she knew it and was sure to take advantage of it. When they were alone on the balcony, he exhaled, because it was much easier to talk to his sister than it was to listen to his mother, who was always arguing and fighting with him over nothing. Really, he could have said something to his mother. "Now you'll be hearing from her for years. All these complaints until she's had enough," Lisa said. "And then you'll hear her say she doesn't want a daughter-in-law like that. But now he's put her on the spot. If she doesn't want it, she'll have to accept it," the man said. He tried to make it look like he was only doing it for his future wife. He was afraid her mother wouldn't accept the bride. From the outside, it looked like he was all noble, a little confused kid, and the mother is all evil woman who could easily not accept a disabled person in the family. Although there was never any such conversation. If I were you, I'd bring her in and introduce her to her mother properly. "Don't you know our mother? She won't say anything like that. Yes, she's not an easy person, but she has no prejudices. All she cares about is that you're happy. And also, of course, that you let her know about your happiness at least once in a while. If we leave now, she'll cry again that she did something wrong in your upbringing." "Since you've insulted her so much," Lisa said, "what's done is done, and I can't take it back." "Well, I have to go." "How long are you here for?" asked Sebastian. Even though his relationship with his sister had grown cold lately, he would like to spend some more time with her. "I'll be here till the end of the week, and then I'll only come in a month and a half, maybe 2. Don't worry, and I'll see you again." "You don't run away from me that easily," she said with a smile. And he smiled at her too. When he went into the kitchen, where his mother was, she was much calmer, but it was obvious on her face that she was still resentful. He poked her in the forehead and then left the apartment. When he looked at his watch, it appeared that he had spent several hours there. To him, however, it seemed like an eternity had passed, but the most important thing was already behind him. And so it was possible to continue to proceed to the realization of the plan. He called his fiancée, arranged a meeting with her, and his thoughts were constantly wandering. He thought about his mother, about the plan that could collapse at any minute, and about all the complications that surrounded him, but by no means stabbed him. He had spent so much time lately on the realization of his plan that he had completely forgotten about all the things that surrounded him. Mistress debts, the eternal problems at work, a back that ached for, flowed down into his lower back area, and at times prevented him from even living normally. He was so tired of it all, so eager for it all to be over that he didn't want to discuss anything with his mother. "Hey, Bunny, how are you feeling?" he asked, walking into his fiancée's room. She looked miserable, tortured, tired. Her eyes were slick with sleepiness, but she was smiling at him. "Just tired from all the medication. The doctor says they'll probably discharge you tonight. But don't worry. I know you have a job. My dad will pick me up," she said with a smile. He looked at her and could not believe that he had been given such a great chance to arrange everything in his life. And everything was going to work out so perfectly. And she had fallen for him like a little child. And he could have taken full advantage of it. But nothing. "Did the doctor say anything else?" "There won't be any complications. Everything went fine," he said, trying to express an interest that wasn't really there. He'd be glad if there were any more health problems to add to her disability. And then she'd be nowhere near him. Her father would see him as a savior for taking all that responsibility off of him. "No, it's okay. I said I need nursing to look after me for a few weeks while they give me my meds. But all in all, it's fine. Oh, and besides, the doctor says that when he put the new denture in, the discomfort will go away and I'll feel much better already," she said with a smile. She looked at him with absolutely loving eyes and literally couldn't tear herself away from him. She glowed whenever he was near her. He thought that was a plus. After all, the more she fell in love with him, the more control he had over her. "I told my mother today that you and I are getting married. My sister was there too. I can't say they're thrilled, but trust me, it won't affect my decision in any way," he said. Again in this situation, he looked like a victim, an unhappy man who has to put up with his family's attitude toward his fiancée. He had secured himself on all sides in case his plan came to the surface. He had to weave a whole web of lies to give himself a head start in case it got out before the wedding. "I think you should have said something earlier. Maybe they'd have taken it easier. Besides, I'm not a bad person, and if I were completely offended, I might still understand. But I'm just missing an arm. And with a new prosthesis, I'll feel much better," she said. He just smiled. Apparently, he didn't want to tell her anything more. He decided to change the subject and was glowing with fake happiness. To look so happy, he wasn't thinking about the wedding or his fiancée. He was thinking about all the money that would belong to him when he finally took her as his wife, and when his father, the oligarch, would already be forced to accept him as kin and take him into his business. Sebastian did not yet suspect that such plans were not even close. From a man who completely disapproved of his daughter's choice and overstepped his infinite patience. Every time he met Sebastian, "Soon you and I will be married. Things will be different. I've been waiting for this for so long, so long. I wanted to make it official." You see, he spoke in dry, standardized sentences, but since she was in love with him, she didn't notice all these changes. "Couldn't you at least introduce me to your sister?" she asked him. But he immediately shook his head negatively. "Believe me, it could be much worse than my mother. When the time comes, I'll introduce you to them all. But for now, it's best not to take any chances, you understand?" he asked gently, taking her hand. She didn't understand why he didn't want her to meet her family, but she assumed he did. It was only to keep her safe for herself. It hadn't even occurred to her what he was doing. This is purely to keep his disgusting plan from being discovered. For the time being. Maybe when a few months or maybe years have passed since their marriage, it would get to her, but not now. He sat with her in the room, talking about how much he loved her and how he wished he could be with her. She smiled, held his hand, and thought about how very lucky she was. From the outside, they looked like the truest of happy couples. But if only someone knew what was really going on in his soul. When David arrived at the hospital to pick up his daughter, Sebastian wasn't there. Sebastian had left early on purpose. He didn't want to meet a man who didn't really approve of him. David looked tired, tortured. Apparently, he had enough problems at work. He looked at his watch. He went straight to the doctor's office to talk about his daughter, whose prosthesis he had promised her cost a decent amount of money, but he didn't care about the money. He just wanted her to finally be able to replace the old one and be able to forget what a nightmare she'd been through. "But let's go home," David said with a smile as he walked into his daughter's room. "Wow, I thought you'd be here in a couple hours," Kelly said, totally happy that he'd come to get her early. "That your boyfriend was coming, for God's sake, daughter. But couldn't you have picked a normal guy? This is a nightmare, a real one. You can tell he's cheating on you. But of course you won't listen to me. And if I forbid this wedding, it won't stop you. But I will be your #1 enemy," said David, who was tired of convincing his daughter that she was choosing the wrong man for her life. "I'm glad you support me. I may be wrong. I may realize in a few years that he's not the right man. I'll take my own bumps, you know," she said with a smile. He smiled too, but there was absolutely no sincerity in that smile. If it were up to him, he would have put this man in a bag, taken him out of town, dumped him in the dumps so no one would find him there. So well, David knew people literally through and through saw that the man who sucked on her daughter like a tick clearly wants to get only money, and on the girl himself he does not care. But he didn't want to fight with his daughter. It was better to endure a little now, and then just help his daughter recover. He helped her out of bed. Tomorrow they would have to come to the fitting of the new prosthesis. In the meantime, they couldn't even wear the old ones. She was used to using both hands. And now, left with one hand, it was uncomfortable. Awkwardly, she got into the car. He buckled her seatbelt, sat in the driver's seat himself. He looked at his daughter. However, he was very worried about her condition. "Daddy, you should get over it by now. He really loves me very much. Very much. Yeah, I'd never seen such love in my life. Only in movies, you know. I just want to be loved, whether I have an arm or not. Yeah, he even fights with his family. And it's all just so he and I can be happy," she said. David nodded. He drove the car toward the house. He looked upset. But as they say, he had no choice. Since he had decided not to spoil his relationship with his daughter, he would have to put up with not only her love stories, but also the very man he couldn't stand and had quickly removed from the family. During this time, Sebastian was having fun at his mistress's house. Cindy, having gotten from him what she had been waiting for, finally lay on the bed and thought only about how lucky she was to have him and how she would get all the money he would get from him and just send him away and never contact such a man again, who clearly felt his own superiority, but did not do a damn thing for it. He annoyed her. She had some conflicting, unpleasant feelings about him, but she forced herself to smile, to pretend she was in love with him. It was like everything was exactly the same as Sebastian and Kelly, only in reverse. And Sebastian was acting just like Kelly. He fell in love with this girl. He forgave her everything and couldn't even think that her feelings weren't real. "I want to go to the sea," Cindy said, sitting on top of him. And he laughed. It always amused him when she spoke loudly, cheerfully, like a child who had gotten something in his head and now wanted it, not caring how he got what he wanted. "Wait a minute. I'm gonna get married. I'll pretend to go on business trips, and I'll go to the sea with you. Now we'll soon have so much money that we'll never need anything again. I'll live with her for a year. I'll file for divorce. I'll make such a fuss that she herself wants to give me everything, just to get away from her," said Sebastian, totally happy. He had an amazing plan in his head. However, the more he thought about what his plan was and what the outcome should be, the more he saw holes in the plan. And while everything seemed perfect at first, as time went on, the reality of his plan also came into question. "Aren't you afraid that her father will figure it out?" Cindy asked, getting out of bed and going to the window. She always went to the window, completely naked, taking advantage of the fact that they were on the 12th floor, and she didn't care if someone else from the same 12th floor could see her. She wasn't self-conscious about her body. She was rather proud of her body. "I think he knows all about it," said the man, turning so that he could see her and enjoy the view he had from behind. "If he had a clue, he'd probably tell her not to marry you," said Cindy, leaning forward to get a good look at what was going on down there. People were walking back and forth. No one really cared what was unfolding here. In fact, Cindy just wanted to do anything to spend as little time as possible with her lover by her side, even when she had him. The longer they were in the relationship, the nastier she felt every time he came, every time he grabbed her with his hands, and she wanted to spend hours in the shower afterward just to wash away that nasty feeling. Yeah, the thing is, he already told her. "I've got her so brainwashed. She'll believe anything I say. But she won't serve her father. You should hear the dithyrambs I sing to her. And love like in the old movies. She gets all swollen and thinks I love her that much. God, how stupid are women," he said. He put his hands behind his head. At that moment, Cindy thought that there are some men who believe in any ahs and sighs from the mistress and piously believe that it is the very thing that is love. She spun him in a matter of days. She immediately got into his plan, and he suspected nothing, but at the same time considered stupid a completely different woman. "When I think about how much money I'll have when I'm inbred with this oligarch, does it take your breath away?" said Sebastian. "All my life, I've worked hard physically. I thought I'd do it all myself, make money, and now I'm just getting by. What do I do? Pretend I'm all lovey-dovey, romantic, wonderful. You could go to an acting course and teach, by God." He laughed, and she smiled, but she thought it was going too well, and that obviously it wouldn't last. "You need to get married as soon as possible, because she might get suspicious. Just one doubt can ruin it." The mistress said it all, looking at him much more seriously. He propped himself up on an elbow, looking at her. Cindy was now spinning around near the mirror. She walked over to him, sat down on top of him, and he took her thighs with his palms. He couldn't believe that such a beautiful woman reciprocated him. "Yeah, I know. And so everyone speeds up as fast as I can. But sometimes I feel like fate itself is already against me," Sebastian said grudgingly. "I told him about my mother, because there's nowhere else to go. She took offense to the whole thing, started some kindergarten. It's good that my sister came. At least she supports me," he said. But the talk about her sister did not please Cindy at all. She didn't trust Lisa. And from what Sebastian had told her, Lisa was the one who could get in his way. And if she found out what he was really up to, she was the kind of person who believed in justice and who was willing to fight for it. Where's the justice in that? If his own brother wants to marry the daughter of an oligarch, ignoring her disability, and all this just to get her father's money, and then go to resorts with his mistress and not worry about anything. If I were you, I'd stay away from Lisa if she finds out what you're up to. Believe me, she obviously wouldn't approve, Cindy said. Yeah, I know I'm in a relationship with her, but I'm not a chatterbox either. I know Nick, could ruin everything for me overnight. I don't think that girl has any limits at all. If she wants something, she'll wake the dead if she has to, he said, shaking his head negatively. Make sure it goes quickly, without a hitch. The quicker it goes, the less trouble you might have. Don't have a wedding. You know, sign the papers, go on vacation, and you can tell her father. He didn't want to spend too much money. Would you rather go on vacation or save it for the baby? He'll just take it as you don't really need the money. Well, not an option, of course, if he already thinks you're a greedy predator. He listened to anyone, but tried not to pay much attention to what she was saying. The more she talked, the more he began to worry himself. And if he started to worry, he was getting himself worked up and could easily let his guard down. And then, when he had a chance to do what he wanted to do, he might pass out of fear. He had distracted her with another erotic game, but now he was only thinking about what he needed to do to keep himself safe and to speed up the whole marriage process. When Sebastian left his mother, Lisa stayed behind. She only came to visit her mother for a few days. But the news her brother had given her wasn't so easy to forget. How long do you think this story will last? Lisa asked her mother, seeing that her mother wanted to talk about it too. I don't know. I think he's definitely hiding something from us. If there was nothing to it, I don't think he'd just make it up. I don't think he would hide her from us just because she has a prosthetic arm, Miranda said. She didn't believe her son. Now she believed he was hiding his fiancée from them for a reason. There's a reason. He doesn't want to play the wedding, and the whole thing looked suspicious at the very least. I think it's gonna come out soon enough. And when we find out where the truth lies, it's not going to be as smooth as Lisa just said. Sebastian's always been acting strange lately. I can't remember a time when he was just like he used to be. Now he's always having thoughts, strange ideas, always having some sort of malfunction. Then again, he's hiding everything from us. Do you think he's in trouble? Asked the mother. Lisa shrugged her shoulders, and even though she hadn't admitted it to her mother herself, she piously believed that he really was in trouble. If everything was fine, if there was no trouble, he would never leave her without information. He would tell her everything in advance. Even if he kept it from his mother, he would still tell her something. He could have told her he was seeing someone for starters, or at least hinted that he was getting a wife. But he didn't even bother to hint. And they talked on the phone quite a bit. But even on the phone, he didn't tell her anything. You know, more than anything, I'm afraid it's his problems that's going to hurt you. What's to hide? He's no good, and you love fixing things for him. Do you like to help him when he gets in over his head? Said the mother in a disgruntled voice. I hope that if he gets into trouble this time, you'll be smart enough to stay out of it. Lisa shrugged her shoulders. She couldn't promise her mother that she just wouldn't do anything if her brother needed help. And how would she ignore him if he suddenly showed up and asked for her help? They talked into the evening, first in the kitchen, then in the living room. But when Sebastian came into the apartment that evening, a drunken Lisa could see in her mother's face that this was far from the first time this had happened. Who knows why he came in tipsy? What exactly was he celebrating, good or bad things that had happened in his life? He wasn't drunk, but he was pretty drunk. As much as it allowed him to loosen up, he spoke fluently. Sometimes he could read the language. But he looked almost like a sober man. But there was anxiety on his face, and it was impossible to hide it. But while your mother is away, why don't you tell me what's wrong? Lisa asked, deciding to give her brother a real interrogation. And while the mother decided to go to the neighbor, she took advantage of the moment. You need to know everything, don't you? Asked Sebastian, clearly pissed off. Yes, I need to know why the hell my brother keeps such important things from me, exclaimed Lisa. She was still outraged that he hadn't told her about the upcoming wedding. She was also outraged that he hadn't even tried to apologize. It felt like everything was going the way he'd originally intended. Look, but if you don't tell your mother, I'll tell you straight up. She's got a very rich father. He's got a lot of money to burn. And his daughter is an invalid. I don't think anyone's gonna look at her. He'll be glad of it himself. If anyone will marry her, believe me, said Sebastian, and his face turned nasty and courtly. Are you saying that my brother, who always condemned everyone for being mercantile, decided to marry for money? Asked Lisa, not believing her own ears. But it turns out that he was so tired of everything. All my life, I worked physically for money, and here at least there will be some result. All the more it is not difficult for me to pour into her ears how I love her, how we have with her everything will be fine. Nothing will happen to her if suddenly she just becomes my wife, said Sebastian. A girl's dream will be fulfilled. She will end up married. But I'll be able to live a normal life and never worry about money again. And then her dad will put me in his business and I'll be blown away. Lisa looked at Sebastian. She couldn't believe her brother was acting like this. She didn't realize whether she was looking at him or at a complete stranger. They had grown up together, spent so much time together. Who would have thought he could change so drastically? But Sebastian had been drinking heavily and saw absolutely nothing wrong in his actions at all. "Are you a saint?" Sebastian asked. A wry grin appeared on his face. He wanted to show that he didn't feel guilty. In fact, he didn't feel any guilt at all. Lisa knew that in such a state of mind, he could easily unleash his tongue. But if she had known what he would say, she probably would not have asked the question, because it was too strange. She couldn't believe he was capable of such a thing, and certainly couldn't believe he could deceive another person so easily. And it was all just for the money. "Okay, look, you promised your mom you wouldn't say anything. She's got a big mouth. She'll give me away. And then she'll get to the mistress," Sebastian said, not realizing that he had just given himself away. He slowly got up from the table, staggered a little, went into the living room, and there, having once again knocked over a stool, went to his room. Now Lisa was generally confused. She knew about the mistress, and that he was only doing all this for money. She couldn't believe it was her brother. It was more like some stranger had put on his skin. Naturally, she would not say anything to her mother, but she did not want to watch the moral decay of her brother. What if she found the bride and told her everything? What if she gave up her own brother? She couldn't decide anything yet. It was all stupid. She decided to put it all away in a far corner for now. After all, mother was right. Sebastian always had a joint, and she would deal with the consequences behind it. Let this time be different. When her mother came in, Lisa didn't say anything. She gave a smack but a peck on the cheek and went to the hotel where she was staying. She knew her mother liked to spend her evenings in solitude, so she did not prevent her. The elderly woman heard her son snoring in the other room. The woman felt tired from the constant nerves and from the fact that she was replaying in her head all that was happening now with her son. She was afraid that he was in trouble, that the wedding was just a cover-up. Miranda sat in her room. She was reading a book, quietly listening to music on one earphone. The light instrumental music was a complement to the book she was reading. But when she heard her son leave the room, she pulled the earphone out on automatic, as if she wanted to hear if he suddenly called out to her. But what she heard was her son talking on the phone. She realized almost immediately that he was talking to his mistress. "Yeah, don't worry, it'll be fine. What am I? 5 years old. You don't think I can handle it on my own?" he said after they exchanged romantic pleasantries. "I told you not to go there. You'll be hooked. Before you know it, you'll be making excuses for what you said," Cindy said. Sebastian sat on the balcony, talking on speakerphone, not even realizing that his mother's window was open for ventilation. When Sebastian addressed his mistress by name, the woman knew immediately that there was something more connecting them. She was already aware that her son's fiancé's name was Kelly, and she was no Cindy. The older woman tiptoed closer to the window so as not to make a sound. She wanted to hear every word. "Look, you and I have talked it over, but if you put me down, if you mess up my plans, believe me, I'll make sure you get what you deserve," the woman on the other end of the line said. "And you always get what you want. That's the way I like you. Look, I'll come see you tomorrow. So do me a favor and keep your attitude," he said in a single voice that made her mother cringe. She couldn't believe she'd raised such a man, and she was disgusted that he was acting like this. They talked again about something romantic and luscious. The woman didn't want to hear it, but now she knew her son had a mistress. Things had gotten too twisted. She had to figure it out for herself. Miranda was the kind of person who never left a situation without her intervention. If there was an opportunity to stick her nose in, she was sure to stick it in. And in a situation where her son had found a mistress, but was hiding his fiancée who he was supposed to marry any day now, it was already something supernatural to her. At first she was angry, but then she decided that the more cold-blooded she was, the better, the more opportunity she had to catch her own son and find out what he was really hiding. The wedding was already the other day. Things will be easier from here on out. The most important thing is that before the wedding she did not suspect anything. And then I'll take all her assets off her hands, Sebastian said. Don't go to your mother's or your sister's until you're married. If they catch you in one place, we won't get out of it, Cindy said. Miranda immediately realized that her son was on the hook and that there was simply nothing he could do against this woman. Apparently, she had been spinning him, and now she wanted her piece of the pie too. Come to my place now. No more hanging around, she said, and she had a pretty serious statement to make. She spoke in a tone that brooked no objection. But if you promise me to do what you did yesterday, I might come, he said. And then he smiled, and you could hear it in his voice. Why the hell are you making everything horizontal? Come, we need to talk. Stop sitting there. You don't realize that the longer you stay around your mother and sister, the more you put yourself in danger, Cindy said. And she was already speaking so insistently that he didn't bother to contradict her. When the woman came out into the kitchen, the son was already coming into the room. He smiled at his mother, looked at her as if he expected to see her face. Did she even hear anything? But he immediately brushed it off piously, certain that she had heard absolutely nothing. He was overly confident that everything would go perfectly, completely unafraid or worried about anything. Mom, I have to go to work. So I'm going to take a shower and then I'll be on my way. No offense, he said. It still threatened to make him smell like booze. He put his phone on charge and went to take a shower, and while he was gone, Miranda transcribed her mistress's phone number to herself and took a picture on her phone at the same time. Her photos to the messengers. She almost immediately sent it all to her daughter, immediately signed it. Who is this? And stepped away. She grabbed a towel and sat down on the couch, as if she was waiting for her turn to shower and then go to bed. She tried to look innocent, unaware, smiling at her son, trying to look at him with the same loving eyes he always did. Sebastian walked out, and then again told his mother goodbye, that he was leaving for work, and left the apartment. And now Miranda was left alone in the apartment. She was going over in her head all the things her son had said. Did he really have a mistress? Could this wedding be prevented? Would this girl believe them? It was all strange. And it seemed that even if they told her everything, she wouldn't believe them. One could only hope that Lisa, who was now aware of the situation, would be able to handle it herself. First, her mother had accused her of dealing with her brother's problems, and now she was suggesting that she get involved in new stories again. But Lisa didn't mind. She wanted to find Cindy and talk to her. Maybe she could prove that she wasn't the right person to cling to. But time was running out. The wedding had already taken place. Sebastian announced it when he arrived home. Apparently, he wasn't going to let his mother and sister into his life any further, and they didn't expect him to. Sebastian was perfectly happy. The wedding was over, and he was sure that no one would be able to oppose him. All he had to do was arrange with his mistress to wait another year, but she wasn't going to wait. Cindy started throwing tantrums almost every day, demanding that he come up with a plan to get the money faster. But he already had one plan, and he wasn't going to make another one up. It wasn't until a month after the wedding that Lisa managed to find Cindy after her mother texted her a picture of her phone number. A lot of effort had to be put in, and quite a few acquaintances had to be enlisted to help in the search. The only thing left was to find her whereabouts, her job, her home, anything where she could be reached, because obviously she wouldn't talk on the phone. Lisa found the house, but when she saw not only her mistress there, but also her brother, She realized she couldn't do anything. She wanted to remain inconspicuous for now. Until this situation was blatant, it was necessary to remain neutral. I'm already tired. I can't do this. Why does she have to be your wife? And I just have to watch you sleep with her, Cindy said in a disgruntled voice. She crossed her arms across her chest. Her thin eyebrows looked tense. Her whole face turned to stone. I've already told you. Yes, I told you right away that I want to take this situation to its logical conclusion. If I go off the rails right now and get a divorce, I'll get nothing at all. Stupid. If you knew how hard I worked to get her out, you wouldn't be talking like this right now. I'm trying for us, by the way, he said. Lisa looked at her brother and couldn't believe it was her own man. She didn't know the scumbag, even though outwardly he was one and the same as her brother. Or maybe she didn't know him as a person at all. But it was Cindy's cry that snapped her out of her thoughts. Why the hell should I encourage you to sleep with another woman? Maybe you like her at all, and you're just taking advantage of me, she screamed. He grabbed her arm, moved her to his side, and started to say something very quietly. Lisa didn't hear a single word, and besides, she tried to write everything down. It was a shame that the last phrases would remain unknown. She had already collected enough evidence to show to the unfortunate girl who did not know what kind of a freak she had chosen as a husband. Cindy, after the words he had spoken to her, sat down on the pipe. She had lowered her head low. He was bringing her to his place. I really only love you, and I only want you. But I've got to do all this. You see, if I don't do all this, you and I will remain beggars. All I want from her is money. Preferably all her father's money. And then what happens? All I gotta do is find some fool from his job who is willing to make it happen, you know. He said. She nodded. And then you get all your money. And I'll be left with empty pockets. I who have put up with you, waited, spent all my youth on you, Cindy exclaimed. And I could hear in her voice that she was almost crying. Well, do you want me to put it on your account first? Do you want to? Please don't cry. I can't bear to see you cry. I really only love you, and this invalid is only in it for the money, said Sebastian. Lisa couldn't hear it anymore. She turned around abruptly and walked towards the car she had left a block away. She wanted to keep herself safe. Apparently, she hoped she could make a deal with his mistress so she wouldn't get involved in the relationship. So she'd leave them all alone. It was already clear that no amount of persuasion would work. When Lisa got into the car, she was faced with the question of whether to tell her mother, but it was foolish to leave her mother without information. It was the mother who overheard the conversation. She sent the pictures. She made it easy to get to the truth, and now Lisa would just hide it all from her. When the girl arrived at her mother's house, she showed her the video, as well as the pictures she had managed to take when she had followed up earlier. Miranda couldn't hold back the tears. It was a shame to realize that this was her son, her little boy, whom she loved so much, whom she believed in and hoped that she would raise a worthy man out of him. But it turned out that he didn't even look like a man. He was someone who easily deceived the feelings of others. What do you suggest? The mother-in-law will come to her daughter-in-law and tell her she's not a match, or that the mother-in-law should come and tell that her saintly son-in-law is cheating on his wife, asked Miranda, who, on the one hand, wanted to take revenge on her son, to teach him a lesson, but on the other hand, was afraid that so she would lose him and would not be able to establish a relationship with him. Do you want to leave it like that? You realize there's a girl out there, another person who's worried, who cares. The worst part is that she believes him unconditionally, Lisa said. The older woman shook her head. Her face was full of sadness. She wanted to teach her son a lesson, but she didn't know what she should do now, especially since she was completely shattered by the whole situation. I don't know. On the one hand, it would be nice to teach him a lesson so he finally understand. But on the other hand, I don't know. The mother was silent. Lisa knew that her mother would be worried that she wouldn't immediately agree on the spot. that it might take more than one day before she realized that they had no right to leave this girl without information. But Lisa was also certain that the mother would not leave this situation alone. Her keen sense of justice and experiences from the past would not allow her to do so. Miranda Fyodorovna promised her daughter to make a decision, but she could think of nothing. Lisa, who came to see her the next day, demanded an answer. Miranda sat pondering what was more precious to her, but at some point she realized she had an obligation to teach her son a lesson. If he hadn't internalized all these values she had instilled in him from early childhood, she would prove him wrong in practice. She herself had experienced betrayal from their father at one time or another, and so she didn't want another unfortunate girl to suffer. Okay, I've thought of something and I'll discuss it with you later. For now, we need to get everything ready. I'm really glad you said yes, even though I know it's hard for you right now. It really is. But he has to realize he's wrong. First, he married the daughter of an oligarch, ignoring her disability. And now what? Now he thinks he can use her without interference. Oh no, he's still my son, which means I have every right to teach him a lesson, said Miranda. Lisa already had a plan in her head, but in order to realize it, she had to think it over. She had to make arrangements with some people so that everything would go smoothly. But most importantly, she needed to go to Kelly, meet her and tell her the truth so that she would know that her husband was unfaithful to her. She needed to know that the only thing Sebastian was thinking about by marrying her was her father's money. The day that Lisa got ready to go to Kelly's house to tell her everything, she was very nervous. It couldn't be said that she had made up her mind several times at once. She even tried to force herself to take at least the first step. It was understandable that she had to tell everything, especially since she and her mother had decided that they could get revenge. But on the other hand, she realized that if she took that step, there would be no other way out. She'd lose her brother. She'd lose the chance to be with him and communicate with him. "Are you sure you've made up your mind?" asked her mother. But she herself was afraid that her daughter would refuse. Miranda had already strictly decided that she would teach her own son, but on the other hand, she could not do everything on her own. She came up with a plan on her own. Completely canceled what the daughter had come up with. She wanted to teach her son a lesson on her own, but she couldn't do it all on her own without the daughter's interference. "Yeah, I've made up my mind. I know you're worried I'm gonna say no, but don't worry. I hope everything will be okay," Lisa said with a smile. She walked out of the house, got into her car, thinking that if she didn't come now, if she delayed coming to see her mother for at least a month, she wouldn't know what was going on here. Maybe she would only hear from her mother how her brother had simply refused to tell her about his fiancée and didn't want to introduce his wife afterward. And no one would have known that Sebastian had married the daughter of an oligarch with a disability for money. But since his mother-in-law overheard his conversation with his mistress, she decided to teach him a lesson. Lisa took out the car, drove slowly towards the house where no one is waiting for her. If she arrived, if this girl refused to talk to her, things could end badly. Lisa kept thinking about the fact that the girl just might not want to talk to her, even though she would provide her with all the evidence. Kelly could just say that she believed her husband, that it was all a setup or something, and it would mean that they couldn't teach him a lesson, and in doing so they would lose the trust of their family man for nothing. Lisa stopped outside the house, looking at it carefully, but hesitating to approach. Finally, she approached the house, called the intercom, and immediately the camera turned on. The girl answered that she would be right out, and in a few minutes she was on the doorstep. Kelly turned out to be quite pretty, a young pretty girl who didn't deserve to be treated like this. As Lisa looked at her, she realized that she just couldn't take not telling her anything. Kelly smiled, warmly greeted her, inviting her into the house. "I didn't think you'd come on your own. Your brother says that you don't want to take me in, but we hope that the time will come, and you will realize that I'm not a bad option," Kelly said in a soft, caring tone, and Lisa was even more upset, realizing that her brother had made it up on purpose. As they walked into the house, Lisa looked around. She had a strange feeling of foreboding, as if she had been here before. Of course, the premonition was wrong. It was just that it was such a feeling. You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about why you guys don't want to take me in. Kelly started talking, but Lisa immediately interrupted her. I'm sorry, Kelly, but I have to interrupt you. He's been lying to you this whole time. We didn't even know you existed. He told us a week before the wedding we didn't know who you were. Why would he hide you? It's only recently that it's come out why he's doing it. I'm sorry, Kelly, very sorry, but I can't let him keep lying to you all the time, Lisa said. Kelly looked seriously at the girl who had come to her house. She looked at the clock, as if she wanted to figure out how long before her husband would be home. And when Lisa provided her with the videotape, and then the pictures, it all became clear at once. Kelly watched the whole thing, hearing the horrible words spoken by the man she thought was her husband. And inside, everything clenched with pain. And the sensation was so repulsive that she could hardly stand it. Look, I understand how it hurts, and I understand how it looks, but I don't want you to believe him. Your mother-in-law. Sebastian's mother overheard him talking to his mistress, and that's when we decided we had to teach him a lesson. We need your help, Lisa said, still hoping the girl wouldn't kick her out of the house. Kelly looked at her and suddenly cried so bitterly that it hurt to even look at her. Lisa put her arms around her, pulling her close to her. Lisa didn't comfort her, gave her the opportunity, just drank properly. Who knows what else she would have to endure while they looked for an opportunity to get back at him. Lisa began to slowly tell her what plan she had come up with, trying to speak quietly, calmly, so as not to provoke more upset. When Kelly had calmed down a bit, it was safe to talk to her. Lisa tried to choose her words, but she could see from Kelly's face that she had already made up her mind. My father was right. He was right all along, and I trusted him. Believed that he really loved me, Kelly said. Her face was focused, serious, but she wasn't crying, though tears sometimes still flowed involuntarily down her cheeks. I know it's awful, and I probably could never have gone through something like that myself. Really, I'm sorry that I was the person who brought you this news, but we've made up our minds. We're going to see him off whether you come with us on this or not. Kelly listened to the whole plan, and she was basically fine with it. But it was all forks in the water. Kelly suddenly decided that she was going to get her father involved. After all, her father had enough connections to teach this man a lesson. Kelly said nothing. A dumbfounded Lisa immediately called her father, and when David heard what had happened, he roared like a madman. He believed what was happening, even though it was hard to believe what had happened. He realized how hurt and scared his daughter was right now, but most of all, he wished they could get back at him. Kelly answered the phone. Lisa and Lisa explained everything, made it clear what they were willing to do now, and what their plan was. The man on the other end of the line agreed right away, said they could count on him. He was terribly angry, and it seemed that his anger was clearly not good for them right now. Sebastian drove home. He had spent a few hours at his mistress's completely happy, not thinking about anything bad. He had no idea that all the people he knew right now were coming up with a plan to teach him a lesson. Sebastian had a smile on his face. He felt insanely happy. Here he had spent time with his mistress, and now he was on his way home to his wife, where such coveted money was waiting for him. Kelly felt like she was falling apart. Sebastian, meanwhile, looked like a man who knew no discomfort. When he parked his car outside the house, he didn't even realize that only a few hours ago his sister's car had been parked there. He didn't realize that only a few hours ago his wife had spoken to Lisa, who had provided all the evidence of his cheating. All of this was unknown to him. Therefore, nothing seemed capable of ruining his mood. Sebastian walked into the courtyard, humming some silly song to himself, and couldn't stop, totally happy with what was going on. How's it going? Kelly asked, when he had already sat down at the table, and she was setting the table, trying to pretend that she was fine. However, it was obvious that she was worried about it on her face. Well, it's okay, I'm going on a business trip, probably the day after tomorrow. I was wondering if I could borrow your dad's car. The one he gave you. You don't drive, he said. Kelly smiled slightly, nodded. That was even better. It would make it clear which car he was driving and which way he was going, because that car is easily traceable. She wanted to offer him her father's car herself. But as it turns out, her husband was completely unaware that he was being set up. He was setting himself up. Why are you so upset? Why don't you tell me? What happened? He asked her, but she only smiled slightly. My head hurts a lot. Probably from the medication. I went to the doctor and got all the tests back today. They said I should come back in a week. I'm just really tired. It's okay, said Kelly, who had premeditated her answer so she wouldn't get caught and ruin the whole operation. Sebastian pulled her to him, sitting her on his lap. She was disgusted that he was acting like this. She was disgusted with him now and didn't even want to feel this touch on her. She hated him in these moments and wished he would leave this house and her life forever. Are you upset that I'm going away on a business trip? Don't worry about it. I have a family to provide for. I don't want to have to sit on your father's back forever. He'll never respect me if all we do is take money from him. Listen, there's something else I wanted to say. Why don't you talk to your dad? I just thought it'd be nice if he took me into his business and told Sebastian, like, by the way, I'll talk to him, but don't expect a quick answer. You know very well what kind of father I have and what kind of temper he has. I hope it'll be all right, although I don't think he'll say yes right away. Why don't we wait a couple months? Kelly asked, shrugging her shoulders and genuinely pretending she didn't realize he was just trying to screw her over. Sebastian nodded, smiling. It was obvious by the look on his face, however, that he was clearly upset. He pulled a smile over his face, and the look on his face was as if he was completely disappointed with her answer. He wanted to avoid pressuring her so as not to arouse suspicion, but he also didn't want to wait forever for handouts from her father. Aren't you afraid that he'll turn me on in the meantime? Sebastian asked, looking at his beloved in the hope that she would understand him and give in to his pressure. No, I'm not afraid. Besides, you realize he's just worried about me. Well, that's just the way he is. It happens. I was thinking maybe you and I could go to your mother's. Pick a day off. We'll see, right? What if she does accept me? Kelly asked. That's out of the question. I already went to my mother's house today and talked to her about it, but she threw a monster tantrum like she likes to do. I'm really ashamed to have a mother like that. But I'm sorry, as it is. I'm sorry, darling, but I'll have to be patient. I know my mother well. I think in about 3 months, when she's cooled down, everything will be all right, and you'll be like her own daughter. And I won't have to listen to her all the time, that I made the wrong choice. But don't worry, she's not mad at you. She's more mad that I kept you from her, Sebastian said. She can't get over the fact that I'm all grown up and don't need her endless tutelage. Kelly listened to him and realized how strange his words sounded, too real, as if it were all true. Apparently, she even subconsciously tried to believe him, knowing full well what kind of man he was. Everything inside clenched at the feeling. Well, I'll go to bed then. I need to get some sleep. Tomorrow, I'll have a very hard day. I have to buy everything for my business trip, buy tickets. I'm also going with a colleague. They assigned me some intern. I don't know, I might have to teach him everything, Sebastian said in a disgruntled voice. But Kelly already knew the grief she was talking about. She was disgusted that he continued to deceive her, and she continued to believe him or pretend to believe him. A few days passed, and now Sebastian was about to leave on a business trip. Kelly, even if Lisa had not said anything, she would have suspected that there was something wrong, because her lover decided not just to go on a business trip, but was going as if he was going to a resort. And she was angry with herself that all this time she was just waiting for him to change his attitude towards her. Right away, she should have put him in his place and trusted her father. Sebastian kissed his wife on the cheek, got into David's expensive car, and inside everything was literally glowing with pleasure. He had never driven such expensive cars. He thought it was a good sign, Now he would get behind the wheel, get out of the yard, and never leave this car again. He's gonna get Kelly to take his car, and he's gonna drive this car. He drives out of the yard and goes straight to his mistress, humming to himself. It was the same idiotic song. He wanted to laugh, to enjoy life. A little more, and he'd go away with his mistress, spend a whole week with her in some cool hotel, and not think about anything, just enjoy life. But most importantly, he had dulled the vigilance of his mistress, who was already sure that he was deceiving her, although he didn't even want to deceive her. She wanted money. She wanted a nice life, and he's gonna give her a test drive. Wow, that's quite a car. Cindy exclaimed cheerfully as she got into the front seat, her smile stretching literally from ear to ear. She looked so happy that she couldn't even calm her own emotions. She gave it to me without any trouble at all. Gullible fool, Sebastian said with a chuckle, not even realizing that the gullible fool he was talking about was calling her father right now and telling him that her husband had already left. But then we need to get a power of attorney right away. Then I'll have to register the car for myself. I don't think she's gonna trust you for too long. You're gonna turn yourself in somewhere, said Cindy. Again, she was worried, because she didn't believe that Sebastian would be able to make everything go smoothly. She was worried that she would be in trouble for his blunder. Cindy had already envisioned a beautiful life, hoped she would get it. But the longer she spent with her man, the more she realized that he could easily ruin it. Sebastian was too superficial, didn't realize that everything could change overnight. He saw his infallibility, and that Kelly loved him so much that she would never believe in his infidelity. Cindy, on the other hand, was convinced that anyone could change their attitude toward another person sooner or later. Oh, come on. It's like you don't trust me at all. Every time I listen to you, you tell me what I should do. I'll decide what I should do, he said in a disgruntled voice. She raised her palms conciliatorily, as if to show that she was backing down. But in fact, Cindy decided to slow down a little with her moralizing. She felt that his happiness would not last long, that sooner or later either Kelly or her father would realize that something was wrong. But Sebastian himself thought that he had drawn a lucky ticket in this life, and now it was safe to move on. Everything's gonna be okay. I've already talked to her about talking to her father about taking me into his business. You think she suspected anything? Already hung his own. She's looking at me with love eyes. He says we'll wait a month, and then tell him he's not going anywhere, Sebastian said, going over his wife's words. But he didn't care how truthful he would be. The important thing was that his mistress believed him. Cindy didn't believe him. It was written all over her face. Well, I don't know. I think you're setting your hopes too high for this plan. If everything falls apart, you don't have any backup. You didn't even think twice about coming to the resort with me right now. But what if she finds out? Cindy asked. Do you have some other way of explaining yourself to her? But Cindy didn't have time to say anything. The large car that had passed them on the right side slowly started to move them to the edge of the road. Sebastian became angry, backing sharply towards the vehicle, which was unknown to him, cussed pretty hard, and was so angry at the man that he wanted to sharply put him in his place. What the hell? Are you out of your mind? Can't you see what kind of car is in front of you? He said sharply, and by the fact that they didn't give way to him. Sebastian was sure that if he sat behind the wheel of an expensive car, other motorists would immediately give way to him. But the person behind the wheel of the big car didn't give a damn about him. And then, from the other side, another car appeared. Cindy, the first one, realized that all was not so clear, felt fear rising up inside her in a wave. Stop the car. Jesus, stop the car. He's going to hit us now, she said, and Sebastian hit the brakes. He sat in the car, afraid to get out of it, because he didn't know what to expect from the people who were pulling him to the curb. What if he tore toward the bridge abutment at such a high rate of speed that he didn't have time to stop? What if he'd flipped out and fallen into the river? Are you crazy? Sebastian exclaimed. finally getting out of the car because the anger had completely cut off any common sense in him. "Well, let's see who's approved here," said the stout man, getting out of the car and pulling out a rifle. He immediately raised it and pointed it at Sebastian. To say that he was dumbfounded is to say nothing. "What are you doing?" "I didn't do anything." "What's wrong?" Sebastian asked, raising his palms, unable to say a single word. He was so scared. Several other people got out of the car. They pulled Cindy out of the car, put her back against her lover's back. They tied them up, and then, without waiting a second, simply threw them into the river from the bridge. So quickly, so unexpectedly, that neither Cindy nor Sebastian even had time to beg for mercy. Everything happened literally in a matter of seconds, and they were already in the icy water. Cindy felt a blow to her side, and then as the blow spread forcefully through her body, and realized that she had probably suffered a fracture. The pain in her ribs was so intense that nausea came to her throat. Before they knew it, they were tossed into the water, before they realized how they were pulled out of there. Just under the bridge, it turned out, were several other cars and heavily armed men laughing as they pulled them out of there. "But hello to you, Sebastian, from your mom," said the man, laughing, and those around him laughed too. Sebastian, who had just been pulled out of the icy water, had no idea what was happening. A shiver ran through his whole body. When he was free of the ropes, he slumped forward, coughing, spitting water out of his lungs. Cindy was just lying on the ground, twisting around, wrapping her arms around her knees. "What the hell?" he asked, completely unaware of what was going on and barely hearing the people talking to him. You know when you find out you're being cheated on by your own kind, when you fly off in the treason of someone you love more than life. It feels like being thrown headfirst into ice water. "So I made sure you experienced it firsthand," the man said. They got into their cars and drove off, leaving Sebastian alone. Cindy was still lying there, trying not to move. Every movement hurt like hell. She remembered the pain and knew that she had probably broken a rib. She was taking breaths, but her breaths were shallow because her strength was gone and the pain was palpable. Sebastian looked at his mistress. She was lying down. It was noticeable that she was breathing, but her breathing was weak as well. He felt like he was to blame for everything that had happened. Pride hurt ego, prevented him from confessing even to himself that it was his own fault, that it was he who had miscalculated everything. "Idiot," she said. She rose slowly, clinging to the bridge abutment. Cindy looked with undisguised pain in her eyes at the upward climb ahead of her. Even a healthy person would find such a steep climb problematic. For someone with a broken rib or even ribs, it would be a nightmare. I didn't know she knew. I'm not supposed to know everything. You can't put all the responsibility on me, he said, quickly, trying to absolve himself of responsibility for what had happened as soon as possible. I hate you. I want you to die here under a bridge, Cindy said, slowly walking toward the stairs. She tried to climb, but each time it was far more painful than she felt. The pain was so intense it made her eyes darken each time. As she barely got up, she immediately saw that the car was still standing, and no one had punched their tires. You're going to take me to the hospital and forget everything. What's my name? Bellowed she, clearly not going to discuss anything else with him. Okay, said Sebastian. Quiet. He already knew that he could hardly ask her to forgive him, and he realized that she would never forgive him. After something like this, he should have kept his intentions better hidden. He should not have drunk to the last, so that he would not loose his tongue in front of his sister. But what's done is done. And now he was watching his mistress, who had broken ribs and was barely walking to the car. She was repeating swear words to herself, which were mixed with painful tones. Cindy, I really thought it was going to go okay. It's not like I didn't know she knew. My mother was in on it too. But it's okay. I'm still teaching them. I'll show them. How does it feel? He said, and she immediately gave him such a powerful slap that he was speechless. The blow was so loud that it rang in his ears. Her face was already starting to burn with flames. Scarlet marks from the palm of his hand, from his fingers, were slowly coming in on his face. Cindy looked at him with undisguised hatred. She got into the car feeling in pain. She could no longer hold back the tears. He sat behind the wheel, drove her to the hospital in complete silence, and when she was already taken away, she was put in a room. He sat in the waiting room and didn't know what to do next. Sebastian looked at his own palms. When the doctor appeared at the end of the corridor, he immediately jumped up from his seat and hurried to him. He hoped they would tell him something, because he couldn't believe that he would be left without news. He could even reassure himself. After everything that's happened, you can go to her room. I'll give you no more than 5 minutes, then leave. She needs to rest now and get a good night's sleep, the doctor said. It was clear from the look on his face that he would never have let Sebastian in willingly. Apparently, Cindy had agreed to let him into the room so they could talk. There was hope in the man's heart that she would forgive him after all that had happened. At least he could hope so. But when he entered the room, when he saw the face of his mistress, he immediately realized that it was very stupid to hope that she would forgive him. Her body was wrapped up. All those endless bandages were fixing broken ribs. And she was looking at him with hatred. And she was so angry that it was visibly hard for her to breathe. Okay, here's the deal. You and I are going to make a decision. One single question. You go away and never come back to me. Never come to my apartment. Never come to the apartment building where I live. You just forget I exist. You got me, asshole. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this idiotic situation, Cindy said. She took a deep breath, and she looked like she was making a massive effort not to destroy him with one look. Look, it's not my fault. I may have had a drink somewhere. I may have blabbed a little. But then it's their fault. My mother decided to teach me a good lesson, I guess. My sister joined in. My wife. It's okay. I'll find the words to apologize to Kelly. She'll forgive me. I'll get the money, and everything will be back to normal. Do you believe me? He asked. I don't believe a word you say. God, you're even worse than your stupid Kelly. Cindy screamed. I played you like an idiot, and you didn't suspect a thing. I don't even want to sleep in the same room with you. I'm sick of you touching me. All I wanted was money. You're an idiot, even dumber than the people you're talking about. Get out of here. I can't stand the sight of you. Cindy screamed, even though every scream hurt like hell. But she wanted to scream. Wanted to let all those emotions out and never let him come near her again. Yes, her plan had gone awry, never ending, but at least she had let him know she didn't want to see him. Sebastian was so shocked by her confession that he just couldn't take his eyes off of her. Because she screamed. Immediately a nurse came running in, literally pushing out a dumbfounded Sebastian, paralyzed by her words. He stood in the hallway, looking out the window at his former mistress, miserable, battered. She was lying on the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Apparently she herself was having a hard time with what had happened, but she wasn't going to talk to him, and she wasn't going to pretend she wanted to be with him again. Was there really no more love on her part? Had she been deceiving him from the beginning? Sebastian was now running through these questions in his head. The only thing left was to go to his wife, to find the words to apologize. Since his mother had decided to teach him a lesson, he would not be able to go back to his mother. He had to find a place to stay, because if he didn't, he'd be left on the street with his bare ass, because he'd lost all the places that could be home to him. As he walked out of the hospital, he involuntarily looked around again. He couldn't believe that she didn't want to listen to him, that she didn't want to talk to him, and that she had turned out to be just another girl to him who only wanted money from him. The whole time he was divorcing Kelly, he didn't even realize that Cindy was divorcing him in return. Sebastian got into the same expensive car, already realizing that when he came to his wife, the car would be taken away. But there was no way out. He had to go to his wife, to talk to her, to persuade her to forgive him. Forgiveness wouldn't be easy, but he hoped Kelly still loved him. He would fall to his knees in front of her, beg for forgiveness, hoping that the remnants of feeling in her heart would help her forgive him. Sebastian craved the beautiful life, craved it so much that he was even willing to give up his mistress, all mistresses. Never would he even look at another woman, just to stay in this good, secured life. But he could not even imagine that he had no chance in front of his wife. When he arrived, Kelly was already waiting for him. She was standing near the gate of the house. There were bags and bags of his clothes. She hadn't even bothered to put it all in her suitcase. She didn't think he deserved it. And besides, it was too much of an honor to fold his things. "Kelly, please. I'm sorry," he begged, falling to his knees in front of her as he wiped his new sweatpants on the pavement. He was literally crawling on his knees to her. He didn't care about pride. He didn't care about ego. He had to beg her forgiveness because he couldn't do it any other way. He hated himself in that second, hated her, hated everyone involved. "Please, Kelly, I'm sorry. I was a complete idiot. I'm the last person. Please forgive me." She looked at him with absolutely no emotion, as if he was a stranger to her. And he knew what that meant. No forgiveness he deserved. Immediately, all the situations that had happened between them and all the time she had spent with him came to mind. And she really did love him. And no one could say that anyone had ever loved him like that. It was only now that he realized it wasn't just the money he'd lost. Most importantly, he'd lost someone who loved him. Maybe no one would ever love him again in this life. These thoughts were so heavy that he couldn't even cope with them. He cried and tears flowed down his cheeks. But even these emotions did not touch her in any way. "You said you were only disabled for money, didn't you? Hid me from my sister's mother. Afraid they'd find out about your plan and get you out quickly?" Kelly asked, in a calm, reserved tone. And he realized that there was no way he could get her to go with him. She didn't say anything. And as long as the silence lasted, he wanted to do anything to make her forgive him. But what she said next crushed him completely. "My mother-in-law, your mother overheard you talking to your mistress, and it was she who decided to teach you a beautiful lesson, for which I am eternally grateful. You know, I want you to get out of here. I hope I never see you again. The divorce will be handled by a trustee." And you, Kelly, you're silent, your head slightly raised, as if you were trying to support yourself with that proud Sue. "And you won't even get a job here anymore. No one will even take you on as a live loader. You got me." She walked away into the yard, closing the high gate behind her, where he would never have access to again. He begged her to forgive him, but she wouldn't. The only thing left to do was to walk away, leaving her here alone. He threw his things into the car, looked at his car, which was vastly inferior to her father's car, which all along had been so much to his liking, so attractive. Only early this morning, he thought about how everything was going perfectly. He stood in front of the mirror, smiling, happy that everything was going according to plan. There was a jubilant carnival in his head. As he was sure that this whole plan was going perfectly, he thought that all the difficulties were over. But life had prepared a very different gift for him. "All right, everything will get better," he said to himself, although he did not even understand the meaning of these words. He felt resentful of himself and how stupid he had been. If he hadn't screwed up so badly, he could have had a very different future. What did he have in store for him now? Sebastian drove in his mother's direction. Even if she did it, he would forgive her. She would accept him. He would live with his mother for the first time. While his mother helped him with his job and money, he would feel more or less okay. Then he'll try to talk to his wife again. Maybe even before the divorce, he'll be able to convince her. He would be the perfect husband. He would show her that there could be a very different life, and he was sure that she would forgive him and realize that everything would be perfect. When Sebastian arrived at his mother's house, he was afraid that she wouldn't be there either, that she would behave exactly like Kelly. But everything seemed fine. "Tell me honestly, did you set this up?" Sebastian asked. He looked just awful. He must have forgotten what he'd been through in the rush of emotion. He had been thrown into the icy river, dragged back to the shore, and now he was standing in front of his mother covered in clay and mud. "I heard you talking with your mistress and decided to teach you a beautiful lesson. When your father cheated on me, I felt as if I had just been thrown into icy water. I was carried by the current. I didn't have the strength to get out. I wanted you to understand what it felt like," my mother said. He heard her at the same time, and at the same time her words came out as if from a distance. It was as if she had been somewhere else in the room the whole time. He couldn't believe that his own mother could do such a cruel thing to him, and heard your conversation with your lover, wrote down her number, copied her picture, and sent it to Nika. And she had already found her. I took the evidence to Kelly, and together we put the plan into action. But now you know what it can be like. It will be a lesson to you, and you will realize that you should never play with the feelings of living people," the mother said. Miranda stood in front of her son and was not going to say anything more to him. He couldn't look at her without tears. He realized how screwed up he was, and what hurt the most was that this situation could have easily been avoided. He should have stayed at his friend's house after all that drinking. He should have at least not blabbed to his sister, just gone straight to bed. And that was it. None of this would have arisen. He shouldn't have talked to his mistress on the phone while at his mother's house. He was an idiot himself for doing such a stupid thing. So now he had to deal with the consequences of his own stupidity. "Didn't you feel sorry for me? Don't you realize you've disfigured my whole life? Her father won't get me a job anywhere now. I'll just be the last person to work with some cashier." "Jesus, Mom, do you realize what you've done?" he asked, looking into her eyes. His mother looked at him, but there was no emotion in her, no regret that he had expected. She clearly didn't regret what she had done. He looked at his own mother, and everything inside clenched at the thought that she had betrayed him and now had no regrets. He stepped into the apartment, but his mother immediately stood across the aisle. He stared at his mother and didn't understand why she wouldn't let him in now. Yes, after all she had done, she should have been grateful that he had dared to come to her instead of cursing her for the rest of his life. Sebastian was terribly angry with her, and so much anger that it literally overwhelmed him. "You should be glad I decided to forgive you at all. And you pretend you're still the cool mom who, you see, put me in my place." He resented that, wanting a response from his mother. "You know, when I first found out, I was very hesitant to set up this revenge plan," said the mother. "You are my son, but I didn't raise you like this. You acted as if all these values I instilled in you meant absolutely nothing to you. And if my upbringing and the values I instilled in you meant nothing to you, then I mean nothing to you." After his mother's words, he realized that expecting her to understand and expecting her to be sorry was foolish. He wished she would forgive him. He wished she would soften just a little so that he would be forgiven. But she wasn't going to soften, and she wasn't going to let what he'd done pass. That if I called Lisa, she'd give up on me too. "I just wanted to live a beautiful life, and you decided that was a reason for you to give up on me?" he asked. The mother took a deep breath. Apparently it was hard for her to talk to him about it, but she had to tell him everything at once. "You spit on another human being. You spit in the soul of a poor girl, taking advantage of her low self-esteem. And you didn't give a damn about how she felt at the time. Now you're in her shoes. Now no one else cares how you feel. Are you okay with being treated that way?" the mother asked. He just left. He was sick of being told what to do. He was sick of everything. He was terribly annoyed that his mother said things like that. He hoped that she would be happy that he had come, but she was not happy and did not want to host him. When he went downstairs, he immediately saw a dark automobile, one of the ones that had been following him as they drove towards the airport. And now there was only one thing left to do to face all these problems alone and talk to the girl's father, because there is simply no other way out. "But come on, what is it this time?" he asked grudgingly, walking to the car. He thought that he would get out of the car, but the girl's father came out to meet him. David spoke to him through his teeth. You could tell he was having a hard time keeping it together, and you thought you'd be welcomed with open arms. You know, Sebastian, if it wasn't for my daughter, I'd just leave you in the Dan River. I even had your mistress contact me. Swore and swore she had nothing to do with it. Apologized. And you didn't even bother to call me. Couldn't even talk to me because you were a coward. Real rotten, the man said. One would think you got all that money through honest labor. Sebastian said also through his teeth. And you shouldn't care at all how I got that money. I spent 14 years working, plowing, hoping to get out of poverty. I wanted to give my daughter everything. But then you show up and destroy her faith and love. Freaks like you should be put on a stake and put stakes on the way out of town, so that the rest of us will not be like you, said the man. Sebastian took an involuntary step back. He did not like this man's plans at all. And she says, you won't let me work. Do you want me to starve to death without money? Or do you want me to sit on my mother's neck? Thank my mommy and my sister for playing the noble. If they had kept their mouths shut, your daughter would never have learned anything like that. Sebastian said, what kind of asshole are you? Well, I promised my daughter I'd let you live. Go on living, but know that sooner or later I may decide that I don't have to listen to my daughter's opinion in this matter, said David. Then he got into the car. He jerked the car forward sharply, and Sebastian bounced to the side. He was just terrified he was going to get run over. He clutched at his heart, scrambled backward, crawled away, and saw David's face contorted into a pleased grin. Sebastian hated him in that moment, but realized he deserved to be treated like that. David left. Sebastian tried one more time to talk to his wife, but she wouldn't even talk to him, let alone listen and build a relationship. He tried to talk to his mother, but her mother did not welcome him either, and just decided that if he had done it once, he could do it to anyone again. As it turned out, she no longer believed that Sebastian could be a good person. Sebastian repeatedly tried to get a job. In fact, the whole time he wasn't working, he was just lying about the job to give himself more importance. So it's not surprising that he never got hired without any experience. Apparently, David put a lot of effort into keeping him unemployed. The last thing Sebastian did was go to his sister's house, but his sister's husband kicked him out, wouldn't even let him talk to Lisa. Sebastian had no choice but to pack his things and just leave, try his luck in another city. I hope that there he will have a chance to establish his own life and not be afraid of being caught by the tail.
Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was the first days of June 2002. There was a strong heat in the city. So many children seemed to be a yard on their own age yet unknown. Everywhere were running, jumping, and shouting, and with precise voices of kids of all different ages, somewhere in the garage, and stood guys, teenagers, discussing the failed Los Angeles Lakers game. What had been shown on First the day before. On the playground, there were loudly frolicking kids about 7 years old. Behind them walked an older girl with a businesslike look, constantly interfering in their children's games, so that they do not hurt each other. On the benches sat a company of guys by the look of middle school students, playing family, throwing to each other a red rubber ball. A homeless man shouted. One of the guys sharply threw the ball to his friend. There was general laughter. The children were so loud that the grandmothers of the neighboring benches, all this cacophony began to annoy. Get out of here, you fools. Aunt Wendy got up from the bench and approached the boys. What can't you see? There are small children playing here. The boys didn't calm down. They laughed at Tony, who had managed to marry an alcoholic and become homeless. Of course, it was all just play-by-play, but still so funny that the boys laughed at the firewood and their bellies, ignoring the indignant look on Aunt Wendy's face. Come on, Aunt Wendy. We're out of here, said Thomas, the rowdiest boy in the yard. Let's go. But what kind of words are you talking about? I'm going to talk to my mom. So I'm going to talk loud again. Thomas shouted after her. They're already leaving with their friends towards the garages. The noisy company left the yard. They were once again chased away for swear words and loud shouting by Wendy, the storm of the yard and the head of the house. What are we gonna do? Guys, Thomas asked the boys. Let's go to the stone field, said Will. Well, we'll decide on the way, answered Thomas. The boys went and hung around the neighborhood in search of entertainment, which of course they arranged for themselves. But whatever they did on those hot summer days, they were the happiest kids in the world. After all, it was vacation, which meant it was freedom. The summer sky was slowly changing, just as it was getting darker and darker. And yet, even at 8 o'clock plus in the evening, it was still quite bright. Not even 200 hours ago. The courtyard was full of children, hence the noise, the shouting, and the life. Now there were only 2 women, one of whom was Wendy, and 2 girls about 8 years old. They often stayed out late. The girls could sometimes go home at 11 o'clock p.m. And their names were Kate and Daria. They became friends, as if, somewhere in their subconscious, they felt they had a similar misfortune, a misfortune. That was dysfunction. The girls grew up in families with parents, alcoholics, who almost did not work, and without bread to water at the expense of handouts from the state, and money on loan from relatives and buddies of drinking buddies. And if Kate and parents were quiet and phlegmatic, and drunkards, then Dad and Mom Daria knew the whole yard. They loved to organize scandals in the yard so that everyone could hear their profanity. It was quite a spectacle for the neighbors. Most of them looked out of their windows and balconies in a civilized manner. Well, rare people tried to take away the grief of the spouses. One such brave woman was Wendy. She considered it a necessity to observe the situation in the place where children walked and adults rested. Often she had to contend with identified alcoholics. In the middle of the night, who decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with their friends. She also dealt with suspicious teenagers who came to lounge on the benches. And she was the one who kicked out the screamers and scandalizers, disturbing people's sleep the night before another workday. She was grateful, of course, but at the same time few people even tried to help Wendy. Wendy would discuss with the neighbors these 2 girls lonely away from other children and playing in the yard until late at night. This fact disliked and frightened her, but she didn't know how to help the little ones, or what to do with them. What if a maniac showed up here? She looked at Kate and Daria on the swings, sharing her worries with her neighbor Lucy from the second entrance. Lucy was indifferent to the late-night outings of other neighbors' children. Indifferent where? Oh, come on, it's not like you're posting. Exhaling smoke from a cigarette, grinned Lucy. Oh, enough of me for all the manky. There are little girls hanging around, with their clothes and holes all over the place. She was indignant. Look at the ballerinas. Look at Jacob. When was the last time they were sober? Wendy took a deep puff and looked at the card with a sad smile. Beautiful girl, so kind, so good. How could she be? Well, why do you look at these faces? Such to be certainly will not want to be, answered Lucy. It's time for bed, said Wendy. As usual, she went to the girls and asked them if it was time to go home. The kind-hearted woman realized that chasing the girls home to their inebriated and therefore inadequate parents was not the right thing to do. But it was at the same time the least evil of the 2 options available to them at the moment. Either Kate and Daria waited until it was so deep into the night, when their parents would normally be asleep, but risked running into dangerous people on the street. Or they come early and run into drunken profanity at best, but were still relatively safe. Such alternatives for little innocent creatures, upsetting Wendy almost every day, but there wasn't much more she could do for them. The next day, the yard was again full of workers. In it, as on a large theater stage, were lined up the usual mise-en-scene for those who liked to look out the window. Grandmothers were still sitting on the bench, teenagers were gathering near the garages, and on the playground small noisy children were playing. Even this noise had long been familiar to those around them. Another unpleasant incident disrupted all this order. It was not uncommon here. Maria ran into the yard, a girl of about 12 from a dysfunctional family. She was followed with heavy steps by a large, red-haired, short-cropped woman of about 50 years old. She was clearly angry, her cheeks red with anger and her eyes bulging. Said it all about her emotional state. These sounds, remotely resembling words, came out of her mouth and traveled all over the yard. A deaf mute lived nearby. Her name was Molly. She was often teased by the local boys, and some of them threw stones at her. That day she had a problem with Maria. For the girl immediately interceded local grandmothers, trying to stop angry Molly. But at the counter, the older women lashed out at the deaf mute. She first waved away, pushed their hands away, but then, saying something incomprehensible, sat down on a bench and calmed down. She took a breath. Still, the grandmothers came closer to her. They saw Molly crying quietly. "Come on, scratch the rivers." One of the old ladies came running in, deaf and dumb. Molly sat on the bench for a while, as if thinking about something, took her dark blue cloth and her bag, which was almost empty. She took her dark blue and rag bag, which was almost empty, and went on her way. Girlfriends Kate and Daria watched this picture with horror. They then discussed Molly and Maria for a long time. What could she have so offended the poor invalid woman? The girls, like the grandmothers on the bench, were hardy creatures. They never liked it when the weak and unlikable were offended. And now they took pity on poor Molly, calling Maria a fool. The sun was shining brighter than usual. There were still many children, grandmothers, and adults on the streets, already having fun, singing alcoholic beverages, and not at all embarrassed by the large number of underage visitors to the palace. She could see the people of the playground and beyond from bottom to top. The girl was hanging from one of the yard turnstiles. It was one of her favorite things to do. Everything flipped upside down, giggling, she told her friend. Her blue t-shirt came down and distressed her small baby belly. "You can see the belly button," Daria laughed. "Mary on the turnbuckle." Kate was embarrassed and timidly took hold of the edges of the t-shirt and pulled it back up. Two little innocent angels were so carelessly playing and chatting about all sorts of silly things on the playground. And everyone had stopped their eyes on them at least once. They were cute, and at the same time in the eyes of these two beautiful creatures was already a lot of pain. And even a lot for 8-year-old girls. It was getting colder outside. A strong wind was falling. In a matter of minutes, the courtyard became completely quiet. Almost everyone had gone home. Thunder rumbled in the distance. On the bench sat a woman about 50 years old with bags. Probably found them from the store and sat down to rest. Daria and Kate were running around the yard, oblivious to the overcast weather and signs of an impending thunderstorm. The stranger on the bench was smiling, having watched the kids run around. The wind blew even harder. The sand soared into the sky. The girls squealed, "Oh," sand in the eye, straight shrieked. "Kate, I'm going home," replied her friend. She quickly ran towards her driveway, looking around. Kate noticed only now. There wasn't a soul in the yard. This had happened before. So the girl said to herself, "Well, here I am again alone here." The only one she noticed was some strange lady with bags. The girl decided to approach her. "Hello, do you need help carrying?" She asked the woman. "Oh, I can manage, my dear. What's your name?" Answered the stranger Kate. "I'm Miranda." "Where do you live?" "I asked the children not far away. I was passing by your yard. Why aren't you home?" "Kate, look at the weather." The woman surprisingly quickly picked up the conversation with a strange child, while with interest, looking at her clothes, hands, facial features, the expression of her face from gloomy became smiling and interested. The girl was embarrassed. She was always trying to make conversation, so that it didn't descend into uncomfortable questions. Parents. And now, when asked about her reason for not wanting to go home, Kate sadly thought of making something up again. She had been silent for a long time, and Miranda, noticing this childish, innocent embarrassment, replied, "Why don't you go home? There's a big hurricane coming anyway. Look, the sand has already risen into the sky. I'm not afraid. A few years ago, when I was like 4, I was alone on the street and it started. Well, then they took me away, but I almost flew away." The girl talked animatedly about the events of that terrible storm. "Well, I immediately saw that you are a brave girl. Now run," Miranda replied. Her face broke into a smile of delight. "Okay," Kate replied cheerfully. She walked slowly towards her house. The wind was still blowing. After a few more minutes, it started pouring rain in the city. Kate's parents, Anna and Jacob, were total scandalous alcoholics. The family was on the books as a dysfunctional family, and everyone knew their situation. The father and mother were quite young, and I was 40 years old and Jacob was 42. In addition to Kate, there was a boy named Tim. Where was he? During the summer vacations, nobody knew his 14 years. Or rather knew, but only the same nobody needed wandering in the yards of his friends' teenagers. They would run around the garages, play soccer, and drink beer. Questioning the local strange man, Tony bought them 3 cans of wine at the store. When Anna met Jacob, they were both quite decent people and didn't drink that much. But genetics took their toll. Jacob's father was a heavy alcoholic. He caught almost all his scandals and quarrels with his mother, and one day he began to turn into that man. Anna, being an orphanage child, and therefore having no family model in front of her eyes, began to degenerate as a person. At first she drank with her husband to get less drunk. Then she became addicted to alcohol. Having no higher education, they could not find a job that would suit them. And now every time one of them got a new job, not even a month passed before they were fired. So the family got used to living at the expense of the state, and especially kind relatives of the buddies would lend them money. One of such was Anna Lucy's sister. The woman worked as an accountant in a construction company and could afford to give her sister a few $100 a month to support her favorite nephews. Miranda began to frequent this noisy courtyard full of unusual personalities and noisy children. Sometimes she was on her way from the store, and sometimes she would just walk by, pictured there to sit and watch the summer's carefree bustle of kids. She walked around, yes, around inside her mind for a long time. But when once again she saw the shy blonde-haired girl, Kate, and her friend knew for sure she wanted to see her. And it wasn't just a feeling of pity for the neglected child. It was something more. Wendy liked to go out on her little balcony on the 3rd floor, where a cat with little purple flowers was tied up on ropes, and the wire was converted to a parapet by an ashtray that was a tin can of Sprat. From there, she watched the life of the neighbors and just smoked. On one of those lazy days when there was no reason to go outside and just didn't feel like it, Wendy saw Miranda. She remembered that she had seen her before. She didn't like her presence in the yard. She doesn't talk to anyone. She's weird. What's the point of being here at all? The woman thought. Miranda sat on a bench. She didn't have any shopping to do this time. She seemed to have come here purposefully. Coming here, for the umpteenth time, she had never struck up a conversation with anyone. And to some she had already managed to be attracted. Miranda called out to Kate. She recognized the familiar face and, leaving Daria alone, ran up to Miranda. "Oh, hello. Are you here again?" the girl said with a childish, naive smile. "I'm here a lot now. I come here maybe 5 times. I've already answered here. The new picture is familiar. Come in, you live nearby." "Yes, I do." "You haven't been around for a while, have you?" Kate was shyly silent. Miranda realized that she had hurt the girl and hurried to reassure her. "It doesn't matter." "Well, not important. So the business was important. And who do you live with? Do you have a husband?" Kate asked. "No, I don't have a husband." "And children?" "No kids either." Miranda gloomed a little, but not for long. Next to her, 20 centimeters away from her, sat a curious little beauty who was as interested in the life of her interlocutor as she was. "Kate, you tell me, what do you do? Are you out with a friend?" Miranda also already knew what the girl had to deal with every day, and she wasn't even a little bit honest with her. This wasn't the 5th time she'd come here to the yard. She had been coming here for 2 whole months. The woman wanted to hear and see the noise and the fun, the child. And if other adults sometimes resented such an environment for Miranda, this yard was a fairy tale. Except for the hair, the girl with the big blue eyes was only the 2nd time she'd seen it. Not much of anything. "I don't know." Kate hesitated, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her finger. "Sometimes we run around the garages." "Oh, don't tell anyone." She covered her mouth with her hands, glanced confusedly at the woman across the garages, barely concealing her indignation, and interjected Miranda. "It's dangerous, Kate. My husband shouldn't, but Daria and I like it. "But she's not allowed," the girl replied. "And you?" "I'm allowed to do anything." The girl grinned so uncharacteristically ironically for her age. Miranda felt uncomfortable. She realized, of course, what poor Kate was getting at. After that conversation, these two different souls became even closer. Every time a woman came into the yard, Kate would throw herself around her neck, screaming Miranda, and hugged her gently, asking about business. Miranda told her that she worked as a doctor in a private clinic, that she loved reading and traveling. Kate had never been farther than the nearest suburbs. She loved to listen to her new friend's stories about the pyramids of Egypt, the blue vast sea, and the big African elephant that dragged their fascinated passengers sitting in Hindi right on its own back. One such lively conversation Wendy overheard while standing on her favorite balcony with a cigarette. She realized that the girl's parents were probably in no condition to know about Kate's new friend, and felt it her duty to steer the woman away from the naive child. She saw Miranda as evil. One day, Wendy decided to talk to her. Kate was no longer in the yard. Miranda sat alone and stared at the burning windows of the houses. It was getting dark. She leisurely approached the bench where the stranger was sitting and addressed her. "Good evening." "Hello," Miranda replied. Wendy immediately there seemed to be consternation and uncertainty in her voice. That feeling was even stronger. Reinforced her suspicions. Nothing good about this woman, she thought. "Do you live here in these houses?" Wendy asked, a little farther away. "I like to vacation here." "Do you like the screams of our children?" Wendy laughed hostilely, sat down on the bench next to Miranda and smoked. "I like children. They don't annoy me," replied the stranger calmly. "Especially Kate. Do you like it?" The abrupt switch from you to you seemed to Miranda to show some hostility on the part of the interlocutor. "What do you want, woman?" "I'm just socializing with the kids. They come to me on their own. And, times are tough. And you know what, Kate, our kid, we're all watching her. And her parents are alcoholics. But we love that girl, and we're not gonna let her get hurt. I'm very happy for you. I don't know what you're getting at." Wendy was a fan of watching the news on TV on cold, cloudy days, when you did not want to go out, even to smoke on the balcony, often gained for his and hardships of the past. The heart and side pure. What is going on? At that time rare were news about pedophile maniacs, and people engaged in such black business as illegal transplantation, slavery, and drug business. All of these puzzles in her mind had formed an unpleasant picture. She was now more worried than ever about the fate of abandoned children like Kate and Daria. Wendy did not question Miranda. She felt it was her duty to declare her attitude toward the local children who were deprived of care and control from their parents. Yet after the conversation, she left the yard with mixed feelings. Or maybe really this woman was just a good-natured lover of children. But on the other hand, Wendy had seen a lot of things in her life, and once came to the conclusion that there is always evil everywhere and in everything. And now she did not understand the true intentions of the stranger, but as if she felt that there was something hostile in these intentions. Friday evening. It was as if there was a general picnic in the city. There were those who, without going out of town, even to the park, celebrated the beginning of the long-awaited weekend in the hot days right in their yards. The guests of our yard were no exception. Kebab cheerful and already a little tipsy. The crowd was making it right on the urn. Not too long ago painted bright green, even though the time was no longer childish. There were still little kids running around the yard. They were the children of the very people who were making kebabs, heatedly discussing the latest news in the country and in their own yard. Is she the one who sat down? That's how he sat down. That's how he sat down again. Nick, what is it? Nick, what do the children want? That's about the kind of talk that came to innocent cats, little children. But they, being busy swinging on swings, running around and playing criminals, did not get into all the details of adult affairs. They only nodded among themselves when they heard swear words from drunken uncles and aunts. Kate was among these children. Her parents were very fond of summer vacations in the yard. One of the reasons for their addiction to such pastime was the most common laziness and impotence. Jacob and Anna did not like to go out for long periods of time beyond the yard or the grocery store, where they could buy inexpensive and tested alcohol. By 11 o'clock p.m., all the adults they noted Friday in the yard were pretty drunk. Their children were still out for a walk. They sat down on a separate empty bench and whispered anxiously about something, peering at the drunken groups of people they knew. Instead of cooking kebabs, it was noisier than it had been an hour ago. If the kids were quiet, the adults were louder, and it wasn't just talking. The guys, it was realized, were conflicted. The more alcohol these people put into themselves, the more they became bolder, more determined, and most importantly, more aggressive. Jacob was the one who yelled the most. He was hurt by the words of his friends, and he got into a fight with his fists. His wife Anna wanted to calm him down, but she realized that she could hardly stand on her feet, and she just did not have the strength to enter into the conflict between the men. Fortunately, this stormy dispute did not end in a fight. Jacob hysterically waved at his buddies, and Anna and Kate still stood for a long time. Sitting on the bench figures, urging to go home in the hands of the drunken father of the family was half-empty bottle, and he barely held it. The family's entreaties had no effect on Jacob, and he barely got up from the bench and headed deep into the houses unknown where and why. The next day, Kate was approached by a crowd of guys and girls about 12 or 13 years old. They smiled wryly, and some had embarrassment on their faces. "Kate, I think your dad's lying in the driveway," told my wife, and the others giggled that she didn't. She said thoughtfully and sadly, "Girl, yeah, there's your daddy lying drunk." Somebody in the crowd shouted, "Go look." Kate didn't go to the entrance of that house. She felt hurt and sad. It was shame for her own man. She was looked at and laughed at, jeered at, giggled at. And what was her fault? Toward her father, she developed a grudge that day, but she didn't know what to do with that feeling. Kate had hoped for years that things would change for the better in their family. She wanted to stop one day seeing those endless bottles of cigarette butts everywhere in the apartment. Kate wished that Tim's brother would spend less time with boys on the street. Wished they could all go to the movies together. Thought sometimes she was small, of course. The shy girl never shared her worries with her family or anyone else. The most painful thing for her was to see a prosperous mother and father walking with their children, daughter and son. She loved to observe such families closely, their habits, their gestures with a look. Somewhere subconsciously, she tried to understand what was wrong with her family. It is difficult for an 8-year-old child to make complex conclusions and philosophize about the causes of certain events that occur in life. Therefore, without drawing any conclusions, Kate continued to live as normal children live, playing with friends, studying at school, and of course, dreaming. 2 weeks passed. Miranda did not appear in the yard. Wendy was telling the local grandmothers about how they were taking her out of the yard. Kate was constantly disappointed, going all day in the yard and not meeting this mysterious Aunt Miranda, who, like a fairy godmother, came down to her from the fairy heavens. Only the girl got used to a new bright person in her life. How did this man disappear? For her, it was a betrayal. But one day she came lightly down on the bench, a skinny, tall woman in a long blue dress and with a bag in her hands, filled with groceries, and exhaled heavily, as if she had been carrying heavy weights all day. Kate, seeing her from afar, rushed towards the bench. There was no limit to the child's delight. "Miranda!" shouted the girl, and abruptly braked, lunged right at the woman. They embraced and began to share with each other the news of the past days. Wendy wasn't the only one. Many did not understand this strange friendship and considered the stranger, if not dangerous. For a girl, this is a very strange oddity. Miranda herself at first could not answer why she had formed a friendship with this little girl. But those thoughts of doubt were quickly transformed. A clear purpose. Kate was no longer so shy to talk about her feelings, about her attitude towards her parents, and how sometimes she had to be ashamed of them. She had long considered whether to tell her about the unpleasant event that had happened with her father, because she had never before wanted to bring out the dirt and be frank about her family. But now that she felt complete trust in Miranda, the language had unleashed itself. Miranda listened silently to Kate and asked her nothing, for fear of hurting or offending her in any way. And at the same time, she was a very attentive interlocutor. Kate sometimes wondered how she could remember such details of her stories. Such interest of her new friend bought the girl up. "Miranda, do you have a mother?" Kate asked her. Sometimes, as is often the case with young children, she asked her companion the most sudden questions that stumped her. "Yes, there is Kate. Why do you ask?" "No, I'm just asking." "It happens. I just wanted to know." Miranda was curious in this girl. Even the most seemingly insignificant things were said by this woodland creature. Not for nothing. And the woman began to slowly consider meeting her as fate. It happened one hot July afternoon. First, Daria friend Kate, which was not at all peculiar to her, walked in the yard alone. Local grandmothers were surprised by such an event. "Daria." Aunt Tanya called her. "Why are you walking alone?" "Kate, where?" "Kate wasn't here, I don't know." Finally, it got dark in the courtyard. Kate was gone. "I wonder where Kate is." Do she and Daria walk together all the time? Wendy wondered. "I don't know," replied Tanya. "Still, I'm worried." Wendy went home to the AG's house. Her heart was not in the right place. They didn't open the door right away. Anna stood in the hallway, in a green robe with her hair shot up. The picture before Wendy was not the prettiest. Empty vodka bottles were lying everywhere. Jacob was lying on the bed, unconscious. "Where are the children?" Wendy asked worriedly. I don't get it." Temka is in the room playing, sitting up, and the woman's petite face took on a completely different expression in an instant. She seemed to have remembered that she had a young daughter who didn't come home at 10 p.m. as usual. "She's not in the yard, Anna." "What yard?" "The time is 11:00 p.m., almost not anymore. She wasn't in the yard." For the first time in a long time, Kate's mother was in great anxiety. What to do now? Next rested her arms at her sides, walking over to the window. It happens so often with people that they think better as when the streetscapes appear before their eyes. She realized that by and large the girl's well-being was of interest only to her, and to some extent Anna, even though the alcohol had destroyed almost her entire personality. It was necessary to help this woman, and more importantly to help Kate escape from trouble. The first thing that came to Wendy's mind was that the mysterious Miranda could harm the girl. Now it remained to figure out where to find this Miranda. No one knew where she lived. It was only known that it was somewhere nearby. Tim came out of his room. The boy looked out from behind him. He had probably just gotten out of bed and had absolutely no idea what the neighbor was doing here and why his mother was in such a state. "Hello, Aunt Wendy." "What's wrong?" "Mom," he looked questioningly at my mother. "Kate's missing." "Missing how?" "Well, she's an emergency." After saying that, Tim went to change his clothes. He must have thought that there might not be much time left, and then there was nothing to be done. So he decided to act at once. 2 minutes later, the boy came out into the living room. He looked at his father lying on the bed. He was in a state. The loud talking had almost woken him up. He realized that it was about his daughter, but he also realized that he didn't feel like getting up to go out, and his excuse to himself was that he wouldn't. Tim looked at his mom and Aunt Wendy. They were the only ones in the whole world who felt real concern for the girl. The boy spoke firmly, "We have to get out." In a minute, the three of them were outside and completely unsure of where to go. It was all her comrades. "I was told that she was picking on her," Anna lamented. "What kind of creature and about what?" asked the boy. "Yes, Miranda is a woman. She and Daria and Kate socialize in the yard." "What? What does she want with little children?" "Rascal bastard. I think I know who we're talking about. Me and the boys saw her the other day. She was going into a house with some kind of archway. I remember Tim." "Yes. There's a reason you're wrong everywhere." Tim, with a bitter smile full of worry, said his mother, "Let's go there quickly." In the last 10 minutes, Anna had managed to sober up completely. Her perpetually detached look had changed to a look full of centeredness and desire to find her daughter. It was a brief rebirth into a real mother, ready for the sake of her child to make any sacrifice. The three almost jogged to the very house where Miranda supposedly lived. Wendy and Anna knew an elderly woman from that driveway. Of course, she was already peacefully asleep at the time, but there was nothing to be done. A child's life was at stake. They called apartment number 5. "Adriana, open up, please. You're crazy. Perverts." You can see the voice of an older lady approaching the door. "Adriana, it's Wendy. Their daughter is missing." Wendy said impatiently. There was complete silence in the apartment. A moment later, there was a rustle and a heavy sigh from the landlady. She barely audibly muttered, "All right, I'll open the door while the children are here." The door was opened by a short, skinny woman of about 75. Her face was hollow with traces of former beauty. Her gray hair was rather short, but her evenly trimmed bangs, which adorned and ennobled her not young face, caught the eye. In appearance, she was good-natured and calm. "But I that my darlings, I did not see your daughter. I rarely go out," Adriana answered. "Do you know where Miranda lives? A woman in her 50s. She's been here a while. I think I asked her, but what is she? Is that what you're here for?" "I know, only she has nothing to do with it." "And you're a grandma. How do you know?" Anna started. The son hurried to calm down the nervous mother, who was on edge from the moment she learned about the disappearance of her daughter. "Mom, stop it. It's not about that. Miranda lives 1 floor above me, but you don't touch her. She's here to help me and feed the kitties on the street." Adriana wanted to say something else, but her uninvited guests were already hurrying up to the 3rd floor. Miranda opened the door almost immediately. "Good evening. What can I do for you?" Without a word, Anna, who stood in front of her, rudely pushed her into the corridor and walked briskly into the room. Miranda understood everything. She didn't resist or get in the way of these people. She understood. They had come looking for her favorite kitten. A few seconds later, Wendy and Tim entered as well. All 3 of them had been looking for the girl in Miranda's apartment, but saw that not only was she not here, but there was no sign of her. "I may ask what or who you are looking for in my apartment?" Miranda said, breaking the silence, the desperation of the girl's searchers. "We were looking for my sister Kate." "Sorry, we thought you had her," Tim replied sadly. "How did Kate disappear?" "Not that." The woman was surprised. "What do you know?" Wendy replied sharply. Her attitude towards Miranda was still prejudiced. "I've been in touch with the girl. She told me different stories. What did she tell you?" "You say we're going to lose her." Anna turned to the woman emotionally and with her hands on her head, slumped down on the blue couch that stood against the wall. Talking about some cars on sticks, she said she really wanted to go there but didn't know who to go with. Anna, Aunt Wendy, and Tim looked at each other. They all realized what kind of cars they were talking about. It was the local attraction near the Oriental movie theater. Almost running, they headed toward the place. "Wendy, I beg you, go home panting," asked the woman Anna. She saw that Wendy was in no condition to move so fast, and yet she was making attempts. "Yes, Auntie." "Wendy, we'll find it ourselves now." "Kate, we'll tell you everything at once." "All right, fuck it, I'll go. Don't wait up." An elderly woman of 67 years old slowly changed from running to walking and sat down on a bench near the living house. Only found alive, she thought. There was both fear and pain on her heart for this child, lost in every sense. Now there were 2 of them. The people closest to her were looking for Kate. They got to the rides that were about to close. "Have you seen a girl around here?" They approached the vacationers. Anna and her son began to describe her, but everyone was silent. Suddenly, someone from a noisy group of young people. She asked. "There was one." "We don't know." "There was a girl. Yours looked like they left about 5 minutes ago. She was with a man, like a man." Anna cried out. "Which way did they go?" "Over there to those 5-story buildings." The young man pointed to the gray paneled houses. Towering themselves among the other buildings, even more anxious mother and son ran towards the houses. They both knew. One of them had a dormitory run to this building. They rushed into the courtyard. Luckily, they saw Kate standing there with a suspicious man in his 30s. "You bastard. Get away from my baby. I'll call the police, you bastard." Anna threw herself at the man and he ran away. "Where are your eyes going?" Tim was moving towards him, but the mother shouted, "Tim, stop. The boy's boy won't catch up anyway. Let the bastard run." At home, the unhappy Kate was waiting for a conversation with her mother, and already having smelled something wrong, conducted to her father. After half an hour of screaming at the girl, the parents left her and went to bed. The clock in the living room showed 13. The next day, Kate did not leave the house. Miranda was worried about her. She sat in the yard for a long time, and then when she saw Aunt Wendy come into the yard, she immediately rushed over to her. "Wendy, hello. I'm sorry, I'm very worried about Kate. What's wrong with her? Did you find her?" "Yeah, we found her all right." Wendy wasn't saying much. "And where is she?" "There's Daria playing alone again." "I don't know. What do you care about other people's little kids? Why are you talking to me like that? What right do you have?" Miranda was indignant. "I just don't understand why you want this girl. She is not your daughter, not your relative. You don't know her parents. What do you want?" "I know Kate. She's an 8-year-old girl. You're not her company. What do you want from her?" Miranda kept repeating the same question. But Miranda didn't want to take on the role of a defendant trying to prove her innocence. Her parents are alcoholics. They almost lost the girl. What if I hadn't been there? Wendy remained silent. She realized that there was truth in the woman's words. Miranda continued, "And I have grown to love this girl, and I worry about her. I see how hard it is for her. She doesn't even want to go home when it gets dark. You see all this and you say to yourself, they're other people's kids. You don't have to interfere, but I'm just talking to her. To you, her mother's drunken face and abusive father are the best thing for the girl. You're asking me what I want. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want me to stop talking to her? Would that make her life easier? I don't know. I sense danger in you. Kate just needs a friend. She needs someone who will listen to her and understand her. I never hurt her, but her own parents, they're monsters. They could be a danger to her, not her parents, not her mother. You have no right to discuss her. Why don't you take care of your own children?" Wendy decided to talk about it not because she did not understand the elementary rules of ethics when she became acquainted with a person. You should not bring up serious topics without knowing anything about his fate. No, she asked the question because she wanted to expose Miranda. To understand what motivated her to communicate with Kate. It's my private life. I don't have to answer to anyone. All I'm saying is that Kate's in danger. I want to do something to help her. Both women were left with their own opinions and feelings after the conversation. But Miranda was more right that day than ever. In fact, her words became prophetic. Kate did not leave the house, and the next morning and evening, no one had seen her for over a week since she had met a man on the street near the yard who was extremely dangerous to small children. She had met death itself, which she had managed to avoid thanks to a new friend named Miranda, Aunt Wendy, and her own mother and brother. But nothing good awaited the girl at home, and life had not changed for the better. In the morning, the father and mother were even angrier and more aggressive than at night. They had both sobered up. Anna told her husband about Kate's adventures in detail, and here was the intention to teach the daughter a lesson. These individuals did not want to think about the fact that their daughter was first of all a small, not thinking child who required attention, care, and most importantly, upbringing. They wanted to take out their anger and dissatisfaction with life on Kate. And that was that. Even the day before, having found herself in terrible trouble, having avoided it, the next day the girl got to the new parents, and having waited for the usual departure of the 14-year-old son from home beat the girl. Anna, of course, did not hit the child hard. She more shouted and controlled the actions of a scoundrel husband, who beat his own child with a belt and bare hands. After a while, the perverts realized that the girl had not risen from bed for a long time. On the pillow, they found traces of blood. Kate had to leave the hospital. She received serious beatings. The cruel parents worried not at all for her health. The girls, as much as for the fact that they would have to answer for their actions to the doctors, and maybe even to the court. Before going to the hospital, of course, they had to come up with some sort of legend to explain such severe injuries on the little girl's face and body. The doctors in the emergency room looked at each other. They weren't just looking at the child. The appearance of her parents made them realize the girl had been beaten by them. The young medic smiled at her colleague. It was, of course, a smile of irony. How many times had they encountered similar tales of a bad fall or a collision with a lamppost? Meanwhile, the nature of the injuries was obvious. It was a beautiful hot summer on July's cheerful, noisy days. Kate lay in a children's hospital on her bunk and looked out the window, dreaming of getting out of those gloomy, unpleasant four walls sooner. The only thing she was grateful for about this place was the temporary protection from her hated relatives. She missed her friend Daria, the other neighborhood children. Despite not having much contact with them, Kate was already starting to reminisce about school. She wanted to go to third grade. She also thought of her adult friend Miranda and wondered if she would be worried about her absence. She really cared about this stranger's feelings. She was no longer such a stranger to her. On the contrary, there was something native in her voice and in her smile. In spite of all the care the doctors had taken of little Kate at the time of her discharge, she was almost healthy, but she was not able to regain her original aesthetic appearance. Still on her face were bruises of the mortgage. But the girl did not worry about it. After all, ahead was a meeting with her dear and close people. After the home, beating Kate began to appreciate the friendship with Daria and Miranda even more. She walked out into the courtyard. All eyes that day were directed toward her, and even though Kate was a little girl, everyone could feel her bruises and looked at her with special attention and interest. "Hi," a friend hurried to hug the girl. "Hi, Daria, I missed you." "Oh, what's wrong with you?" "Did someone beat you up?" "I fell." "You fell really hard." Yeah, Aunt Miranda asked about you a lot. She was worried." "I know she was. That's okay. I'll see you soon." Daria asked about the details of the fall for a long time, of course, not realizing that she was hurting her friend and that she was being as inept and childish as she could, twisting and making up stories. So uncomfortable and hurtful. Kate hadn't been in a long time. She caught herself in a complicated and unchildlike thought. I already have to lie to hide all these nightmares from others. And with that, she firmly decided, I don't want to lie like this for the rest of my life. But as usual, she didn't know what to do to make her life, which was still just beginning, change for the better. Miranda was not in the yard that day. This circumstance upset Kate. Still, she was glad to be back in such a familiar and native place as the courtyard. At the same time, at the sight of the entryway of her own house, she grew gloomy and depressed. Even her feet were showing. And with all her body and soul, she wanted to stay away from that place. When she was left in the yard, as always, almost the last one to arrive, she made her way to the entrance. She felt bad thoughts overpowering her. There was panic. Each step was given to the girl with heaviness. It was as if more and more shackles were being shackled to her feet. She stood by the front door for about 5 minutes and pondered. I don't want to go there. I really don't. I'd rather live on the street or at Aunt Miranda's. I don't want to live with them. I hate them. Why isn't Aunt Miranda my mom? It would be better for everyone. For the first time, a thought occurred to the girl. It was so strange and yet logical. To live with Aunt Miranda. She did not want to impose on anyone and realized that her thought would not turn into reality. Meanwhile, tired, long ago lonely, and unhappy doctor-gynecologist counseling pregnant and planned pregnancy women. Lying in her dark room on a soft couch, she stared up at a black dot on the ceiling. Her eyes were so focused, as if she was contemplating her future life in that dot. In fact, she was. She liked to think, dream, fantasize. On a weekday after work. And as a rule, everyone had her even well mapped out. The available thoughts ended with painful digging herself and reminiscing about the mistakes of the past years. So she started with a vague future and ended with a heavy past, which now and then pressed an incomprehensible weight on her. Now, it was true, her habitual thoughts were often supplanted by thoughts of little but very brightness. Youngsters from the sun named Kate. She was alarmed at the sudden disappearance of the girl. Still, she was always glad to think of her and the innocent nonsense she loved so much. Their meeting took place almost 2 weeks after the next time they saw each other. Miranda, meeting the girl near their favorite shop, was both pleased and chagrined. but she did not question her about anything. Kate, as usual, started talking about her love of butterflies, about the bright star she had seen the day before in the sky, about classmates, and about how she wanted to go to school and was thinking about how difficult it would be for her in 3rd grade. Miranda, like the girl herself, acted like her little one's face. Her friends didn't change, even though it was difficult for her mentally. As Kate told her her next stories, she had conjectures, conclusions, and possible solutions. It was them. It was her inadequate parents. Swirling around in her mind were angry women, only it was just like Kate's. She had no way out of this terrible situation, in which an innocent child suffered and had long since chosen the streets of the neighborhood, in which dysfunction and danger reigned supreme. Always those girls snooping around. The locals were talking about Kate and Dasha. They didn't like it, and they understood the reasons for the girls' new wanderings on the street. But no one wanted or saw any point in doing anything to help them. And why should they? The kids had parents. And that meant that everything that could happen to the children was only on their conscience. What's fair then? The first person who really took an interest in Kate's plight was Miranda. She was lonely. Not long ago, her husband had left the woman. They'd been married for 20 years. It was a difficult decision for the two of them, especially Miranda. She loved Will. She gave him all the comforts of home, warmth, love, care. But most importantly, since some time for Will was to hear, finally, the cries of the baby, though beautifully furnished, but so quiet apartment. Miranda was 52. The last few years had been the most active for her in terms of having a baby. She had convinced herself and her husband that everything would work out, even though she was at such an inappropriate age for childbearing. A year ago, William turned 51. Do you realize it's a shame to have a baby at this age? What? Ashamed. Miranda quietly, timidly, and at the same time with a slight note of complaint, turned to her husband. So you're ashamed of me? Miranda, you're not. I'm just tired already. Of what? I'm 47. You're 51. We should just calm down, you know. All I know is that we can't give up. All the money that's been spent on this. Exactly, William said. What's the point? It's no use. This conversation was especially bitter for the women. They had been married for so many years. And now, after the hurtful words, the union had a good chance of falling apart after many years. William also worked in midwifery, and lately it had become hard for him to do this important business of delivering women. After all, his beloved had never given him a child. The decision to leave Miranda was not easy for him, but he did not make it overnight. William simply postponed it for another year. He loved her, but her prolonged and hopeless infertility sometimes frustrated him to such an extent that the only solution he saw was separation. Will felt himself growing colder to his wife, to her problems, to her successes, and even her joy when she smiled and laughed. All he did was squeeze a smile out of himself. 52-year-old gynecologist Miranda Fede. Of course, she saw Lyubimov's changes, but she didn't want to accept them. She let him go with the thoughts that he, like her, was tired of being devastated. At first, Miranda supported the former spouse, calling him and inquiring about his health mood. But things changed. In a moment, she learned that her native beloved William will marry for the second time, and the chosen one was a young girl, a nurse named Kelly. Miranda knew her, and I knew her. They often saw each other at the order of authorship. The girl was sweet and modest. She was pretty, but she was immature, felt nothing for her but reveled in her youth. She had no idea that a certain nonverbal relationship had already developed between them, that little by little was destroying her already shaky marriage. Miranda later learned that Kelly was pregnant. She made a difficult decision for herself that day. She moved out of the neighborhood where she and Vidya had met and lived, where she had worked for over 10 years, and had been calling for a private perinatal clinic for a long time. And she, as if sensing that one day these people would be useful to her, did not refuse them, citing the impossibility of getting a job with them due to various difficulties. Miranda began to breathe hard again, and again stumbling over her ex-husband's personal life information. It became unbearable. William tried to avoid her so as not to hurt her feelings, but they worked in the same place. This meant that meetings, though rare, were inevitable. She moved to a disadvantaged neighborhood, but living there was geographically convenient for the weekday commute. Here she saw for the first time this little girl, who touched the most delicate strings of her soul. The thought of children never faded in her mind. She still wished to have a child and even planned to go to an orphanage. But the acquaintance and further nice, kind conversations with Kate all had postponed that trip. She was already interested. There were other children. For her, as for other real moms, they were strangers' children. One had so imperceptibly and quickly become her own. Another already less tense conversation with Wendy seemed to gather all Miranda's thoughts into one decision. She didn't understand what she had heard from her neighbor, but she felt that she understood everything. Again you asked the approaching Miranda, holding the bags in her hands. Me again. You know I live nearby. Maybe I'm not allowed to sit in the neighbor's yard now. You start acting like you want to. Just as weird as I am. All right, that's enough of that. Where do you go grocery shopping? You live online, and we all go to a 10 instead of a meeting. Well, I can go there too, she answered indifferently. Clearly, she was thinking about something else. I was not very concentrated on the conversation. There was silence between the women. A light summer breeze ruffled the blonde strands of hair that came out from under Marina's crap. She looked away toward the noisy roadway. Miranda, are you married? I'm not. And children? Miranda didn't answer. Wendy didn't bother asking her. She suddenly thought of her family of gays. And these alcoholics are our two children. Tim and Kate is your favorite, but she herself is an orphanage. Miranda asked thoughtfully, what a wedding we had here. We partied all night. They went to a restaurant. It was such a PR, I don't know where he found her. And then the bottle. And that was it. There's a lot of people like that around here. It's just the most scandalous ones. Miranda eagerly caught every word from Aunt Wendy, looking for salvation and a way out of the situation. And when she got home with bags full of food and lay down on her blue couch, she began to have intrusive thoughts. Not an alcoholic. The orphanage, so Kate doesn't know her grandmother. So what? Why are you telling yourself all this? No, what's the big deal? It's August. The kids were starting to feel a little bit more like school was approaching. Some were anxious, some were excited. And there were those who were especially pragmatic, who thought that it would be good to use the last summer money to the fullest, without thinking about the future. But as it got significantly colder outside, neighbors smoking on the balcony was no longer observed. In the yard, such a noisy, large crowd of children became noticeably quieter and calmer. It was a quiet, calm, and cool day. Kate went outside in a light pale green jacket. Daria was not in the street. She was walking alone, daydreaming about something, and occasionally daring to step into a sprint. Her mind was whirling merrily, swapping one for another. Childish, funny, ridiculous, and just plain fun thoughts. Miranda came later. She called out to the girl. Kate, hi. How are you doing? Miranda, hi. I'm good. How are you? She walked over to her friend and saw that she looked puzzled about something. Miranda had been really thoughtful since morning and afternoon at work. And now that she'd met Kate. Miranda, you look sad, the kids said. I was just thinking, my good ones. About what? About you, Kate. I think about you a lot now about me. What's there to think about me about? After a moment, the woman said uncertainly, how are you like me? Yes. Do you like star butterflies too? The girl smiled. No, my girl. You and I are alike in more ways than just that. You're my kin. Kate didn't understand what Miranda was getting at. Miranda was silent. She was uncomfortable with something she had already considered several times, something that had been long ago decided by her. Now it was so hard to voice to this trusting little angel. So reluctant to deceive her. I am your grandmother. Quietly, she said. But it can't be loud. Having said these words, the girl took a deep breath and covered her mouth with her palms. I don't have a grandmother. I don't have a mom. She's from the orphanage. I know, Kate, your mom was taken away from me a long time ago. And now I found you, Tim. You have your daughter. Your mom upset me. I don't want to know anything about her. She's hurting you. So Mom doesn't know about you, but you know everything now. Miranda wanted to make one very important, unexpected suggestion to the girl, but restrained herself, thinking that today she had enough information, which was not only shocking, but also false. This woman had suffered much in her life. It was a long time for him, in spite of his efforts and righteous living, to face the fact that she could not once again have a child. A small and sharp blow was the betrayal of her husband. Of course, all these events had affected Miranda, and she was no longer the same. The moral boundaries within her were erased. It seemed that she was ready for the most any stupid, rash, and terrible step. She thought long and hard about the neglected blue-eyed girl named Kate. And finally, she had made up her mind. She was going to steal her away from her family. Miranda was at the stage of thinking out her course of action. She had no margin for error. A mistake meant a complete failure in life, closing the last door to at least this late personal happiness. That in her case meant imprisonment. Miranda realized if she was caught, she would not survive the shame and imprisonment. Careful and cautious, the dweller of the house with the arch was not only watching Kate. She already knew quite a bit about her parents, her brother, those who might have caused the threat. One of them was Aunt Wendy. Miranda learned that the grief her parents had found as of late had been in a terrible drunkenness and had seen and understood little of the world. Those we came home less and less often. Rumors that Anna and Jacob were in an inadequate state spread from bench to bench, from yard to yard, with the speed of the first August leaves falling to the ground. Everyone knew the couple hadn't left the house in weeks, unless it was to replenish their supply of alcohol, which at the time was vital to them. The day of the false confession, Miranda was still a little doubtful about the correctness of her action and further plans. She sat at home in the semi-darkness and pondered. But for each of her inner questions, she found the answer that was the justification she so desperately needed. That night, she was like Raskolnikov, dividing people into the creature or the entitled. Miranda wondered to herself, why am I afraid to put the girl out of her misery? Does she really have the right to have and raise children? Where is the justice? As time went on, the questions became fewer, and in their place were now mostly statements that Miranda, of course, thought were correct. Alcoholics aren't human. Kate has a right to be happy, and I will make her happy. Why have I been tormented all my life? Why is it fate that I don't have children? I've done everything for this. Will I not be rewarded for it and have an outlet? Miranda interrupted her heavy meditations. Crying. She became unbearable, sad and afraid. She feared for herself in case of failure. She feared for the girl in case something inside her did flinch, and she put it like that. But she lost her tears and looked at the homemade bracelets made of small, colorful glass balls that Kate had given her the day before. I'm still going to save this girl by all means. They met again. Kate knew where her adult friend lived, and Miranda invited her over. It was early weekend morning, about 8 o'clock or a little earlier. That way the risk of being seen by the locals was reduced many times over. Miranda was afraid that Kate would not want to go far away for a long time and with a stranger from her family. She loved Tema, though she rarely saw her. She loved the place she lived in. She also loved the school and the teachers. Thoughts of the girl's possible disagreement were now perhaps the only obstacle to her goal. Miranda looked at Kate seedily, hers practically gone. The girl had been surprisingly cheerful and alert that day, but that she didn't tell anyone anything like I asked Kate to. What's wrong with you? No? In a whisper, Kate said. Kate, I have a serious conversation to have with you. Just please think yourself well. The girl looked intently at Miranda. Kate, I want us to go away, go to my place. This place outside the city forever. Asked the girl. She was even more surprised and confused than when she had heard that the mysterious woman turned out to be a grandmother. This question was one of those that Miranda had not thought through at all. What was the best answer? To lie again or to tell it like it was? She didn't want to lie to the girl again after that big deception, but her reaction scared her. Kate was terrified, and in her eyes she could read it. A sudden sadness came over her. She was a child after all. And her parents, no matter how they sometimes showed themselves, were her family. And most importantly, she loved her brother Tim. Not for a year, or maybe 2, I want to, and then we'll come over. What will Mom and Dad say? I mean, they'll fight. I've talked it over with them. Unfortunately, there's no time for goodbyes. If we don't leave, we'll never leave now. A decision. The girl laughed for a long time and looked at the floor. Occasionally, she glanced at Miranda, and the latter just stared at the unfortunate child whose life could change abruptly in a moment. And what was wildest of all, she had to decide her fate here and now. Okay, we'll go, I've decided. Miranda exhaled deeply and trying to hide her extreme satisfaction from the psychological work done. The woman already had everything ready. Clothes, warm summer shoes, hygiene products, books, skew to the road. All this fit into a dense bag and a large backpack. Miranda did not want to attract unnecessary attention with a big bulky suitcase. Her task was to leave the city limits with her child as discreetly as possible. They boarded a bus first, then another, then a third. That too was part of the precaution. But on the bus, there was no need to show identification. After all, it was dangerous to leave any traces in the form of information about themselves. Miranda had distant relatives she had visited when she was young. It was a village far from the city. Not abandoned, but dying out. Mostly old people lived there. And life there had a slower and more measured pace. No one quarreled, no one fought. People went about their daily lives and went to the store 5 kilometers away. They talked to each other on the benches. And sometimes they just admired the view from the window. They watched the birds of the sunset from the branches of the trees. If someone was in the habit of coming here every 10 years, that person would not notice that something was changing. Even the villagers appeared the same. After decades, there was a magic to this place. The townspeople called the village by the humble name of Bull's Bermuda Triangle. Kate, to the delight of her new grandmother, had been like a child in her first days in the village, neither picky nor fussy. The environment was calm and quiet, but it was quite difficult for an 8-year-old girl to change her routine. Miranda drew water for the 2 of them from a well. Washing had to be done in a narrow wooden house with a wooden floor. On a stand lay an old mill. There was a bar of white soap stuck to it, which had already turned to stone, making it impossible to wash properly. Fortunately, Miranda had all the necessary hygiene products with her. She loved wood to heat the house. It was a most amusing sight for urban Kate. She'd seen wood chopping, of course, but only on TV. And they were all strong, sturdy men. And here the grandmother herself was engaged in such unladylike labor. After a couple of days of living in the cabin, which was, by the way, despite all the inconveniences, quite cozy for living in it, Miranda and Kate had a conversation. The woman wanted to secure herself and her once more from the people who would certainly be looking for them. Glasses of delicious trophy tea were left on the table. Kate returned to the house after a hike to a nearby grove. But what found mushrooms only one girl sadly showed her grandmother. Do not worry, come fall. We'll go with you to the forest full of them to pick them. Kate sat down at the table. She took a glass in her hands and began to give up steam, going to the hot trophy tea, inhaling with her nostrils. His beautiful forest scent. Miranda looked at the girl and thought about the fact that she was still in danger. What if people came? What if word of the girl's disappearance was already going around the country? She remembered that look of instant sobering and a mother ready to kill her Kate when she came to her in that one. What was she capable of? She didn't know. One had to be reassured. No matter how calm and detached the inhabitants were, anything could happen. Kate, I have something to ask you, Miranda said shyly. Kate had already drunk tea and started on the cookies. Aha, the girl replied nonchalantly. You could call me Mom. Kate could not answer this question immediately. A week ago, the person sitting across from her was just Miranda. A few days ago, her own grandmother, and now she was asking for something more difficult for a young child to understand. I know it's difficult, but it's necessary. But I have a mom. Miranda did not coax the girl. She decided that she herself would indirectly encourage Kate to do so. Now she addressed her not only as Kate, but also as daughter. She looked quite young for her 52 years and afterward. Kate, it was so wild for me one day to still address her as Mom. Kate's appearance also underwent a change. Long hair going all the way down to her elbows. Hers was now short and the ends barely touched her shoulders. Meanwhile, while Kate and Miranda, drinking tea in the village cottage, heated by the seal of the couple and only noticed that the daughter disappeared from the house and did not appear for more than 3 days. To make such a conclusion, they were helped by Tim. The boy, too, had been leaning here and there with his friends all this time. And it so happened that he just ran from the hallway to his room or slept there, and also quickly removed in the morning to the street. The boy was exposed to the influence of drinking company. There were 16-year-olds among them, and they all knew about beer, vodka, and cognacs firsthand. Tim got bored, just hanging around the streets of the neighborhood, so he joined the older guys. Now his summer everyday life consisted of fun drinking with grown-up guys and girls, mopeds, and alcohol. Theme: all these 3 days felt something wrong, but could not understand what was wrong. She was living her own life, where there was almost no room for family. And although he loved Kate, but for a while he forgot about her that day when he decided to relax at home longer and play an online game with friends. The older brother remembered that his little sister didn't annoy him like before, didn't ask him about anything, and didn't ask to sit at the computer. He didn't see her in the yard when he came home. Tim went into his parents' room. They were both in the mid-afternoon state. Mom, Dad, where's Kate? Anna got up on the bed and held out her palm from behind the back of her eye. Kate. Jacob. Jacob, have you seen Kate today? The man, awake, still didn't understand what the housemates wanted him to do. Kate, gone. Don't you understand? His wife yelled at him. What do you mean she's gone? She's not missing. She's walking around the yards. From despair and indifference, Jacob, she slowly sank into the chair and grabbed her head with her hands. What a nightmare. Kate, she cried for the first time for her daughter, rather than risk never seeing the girl again, and something told her that now there would be no happy ending. Just as it had been when they had searched for Kate with Tim and Wendy. The day they realized Kate was missing, the neighborhood police were called in. And the very next day, the whole town was looking for the little girl. On almost every post and on every bulletin board in the city hung the black and white portrait of Kate, a beautiful, blue-eyed girl with a kind smile and gorgeous, long, blonde mustache hair. The case of missing 8-year-old Kate quickly spread across the country. Every region was involved in the search for the missing girl to a greater or lesser extent. Of course, when visiting the police station, they never forgot to mention a certain Miranda, who had lived in a neighboring house for some time and was friends with Kate. She's the one who stole the girl. I know for sure we should look for her, said the desperate women. But it turned out that Miranda was living in the apartment illegally, and no documents were provided to the landlord. A second case arose, and the police took up the search for the owner of the apartment. All these problems were even more waiting to get on the trail of the kidnapper. It turned out that no one could say anything about this woman. Especially the police did not want to develop a man who was not seen for anything criminal, except for socializing with a little girl. It wasn't clear to anyone, including the investigators. They sat in a small, stuffy office with old furniture and already retired from modern technology computer, turning on everything once in a while and discussed cases. There were 2 of them, a young investigator, Andrew, and a senior police lieutenant, Michael. But that's what it wants from us, angry as a cattle. It's her own fault that the girl is missing. But you can see from her face that she was beating her. Come on, Michael. We got a kid to find. Who we got in the pipeline? No one. You remember what that broad said about that sketchy janitor who left with the girl? I think that's him. And Miranda is some kind of fairy tale creature. Basically, if we work hard enough, we'll find her. We can do a sketch based on the mother's description, canvass the neighborhood. Andrew, let's not do that yet. We'll look for this asshole for now. And the aunt is for just talking to the little one now. Do we have to bring everybody up? It seems to me that after these 2 words, Andrew became silent, which could have cost him the revelations that he was suddenly so eager to express. What do you think? It seems to me that if they were looking for the daughter of some local oligarch, they'd find Miranda, this one and anyone else. Andrew's still young. Senior Lieutenant Michael's conclusion was completely inappropriate and ill-considered. It carried no hidden meaning except that Andrew was really physiologically young. With such phrases, the chief subdued the ardor of energetic employees who, as he believed, had not yet known real life. So the investigators agreed that Miranda should be excluded from the suspects, especially since the investigation had no information about her. Miranda. Having been alive for a month now, Kate never lost her guard. When she came to town for a necessary occupation, she came across a photograph with a familiar face on one of the lampposts. It was Kate. The woman became uneasy. She found the nearest bench and sat on it. But here I am, a criminal. I've stolen someone else's child. But how unfair is life? Miranda in general lately more and more agreed with that inner self, which once pushed her to deceive Kate, and later to kidnap her. She played the role of savior, sincerely not understanding and not accepting the outside world and people around. All people seemed to her not decent, evil, and worthy only of punishment and retribution. And she also fell in love with the word fate. Everything that happened to her and her Kate, she called this word. But none of it was a dialogue with her friends or coworkers. It was a dialogue with herself. Talking to Miranda was not something she was afraid to do with anyone. Getting unnecessarily caught up with people in whom she saw only hostility. The town Miranda traveled to was small. The local police knew about the village, but they did not disturb this small world cut off from civilization. We won't stick anything in the village. There is nothing there to scare the locals with all sorts of passions, the head of the department told her charges. 3 months passed. The cold November has come. Nature had seemed to rise one day after a long wait and reward all living things with the sharp colors and fragrant smells of spring. Tim was on his way back from school. He was no longer part of the company of those murderous boys. Interacting with them had fatally, he believed, affected his life and the lives of his family. He walked down the dark corners of the streets, and his heart could not, with the pain of the darkness, remembered his sister again. How little time I spent with her. I should have been watching her and helping her. I hate you. The boy had never been fond of his parents. But now he would come home to lock himself in his room until morning and head off to school again. A strange feeling attended the boys. It was as if Kate had ceased to exist for him. He still hoped that she would show up one day, but that hope was fading with each passing day. He walked into the hallway. The apartment was quiet. Street concerts, squabbles, and shouts carried from the neighboring courtyard. It had been a long time since the neighbors had been heard, and in general, they were less and less mentioned by the locals. Only the grandmothers, when they saw the gloomy Anna walking towards the wine store, murmured among themselves, discussing the woman's hard fate. What a pity for her, they said. Only Wendy did not consider this character a victim. She was the only one who seemed to know something and was never embarrassed at the sight of Kate's mother walking down the street. While the child was being searched for all over the city and people around her were discussing this horrifying event, she was calm. The subject issue, a muffled voice, came from the kitchen. It was Mom. Tim didn't answer anything and headed towards his room. Tim called out to his mother even more quietly. The boy reluctantly walked into the kitchen. He saw a pathetic creature that very roughly resembled a woman. Anna's face had grown coarser and was covered with numerous wrinkles and puffy. Her hair, as usual, had an unwashed and unkempt look. She smelled like she hadn't showered in a week. Maybe she hadn't. I haven't heard anything, nothing new. Do you think she'll be back? I don't know, exhaled the subject to the press. Tim sat down opposite. There was an ashtray on the table. One of the bowls was also downing his only cigarette. The boy saw a tear on his mother's cheek. She rested her fist, and her forehead and sobs looked at the floor. The picture is my daughter. The subject was in a state of stupor. He pitied his mother, but the feeling did not leave him. The boy realized that all these tears and worries were the payment for leaving them once, leaving the one who needed them all. Even though he saw in his mother a kind of rebirth, it had even pleasantly surprised him at one point. But the thought of Kate being gone, with them, brought him back to a harsh reality where there was no room for any positivity. Still, he instinctively got up from his chair and walked over to Tim's mother, put his arms around her, and whispered, "It's not your fault. Don't torture yourself. I love you." November replaced December, and later winter replaced spring. It was especially painful for Kate's family to spend time in the backyard of the house, the very noisy realm of children where Kate loved to spend time. Both Tim and his parents. After several times visiting the palace, they decided not to go there anymore and began to avoid the place. But time moved inexorably on, turning fresh wounds into scars and fresh memories into emptiness. Kate grew up and well. When she turned 15, it wasn't enough to have her mother's books and an old TV with 2 channels. The girl had no friends and no phone. She was a real schoolgirl. And if her mother wasn't around, she would go feral. Miranda became sick more often. The woman was 61 years old. Her only help and doctor was her daughter Kate. She left inside her this fear for her beloved and only being on Earth, and in 7 years never made friends or even acquaintances. And if Kate was enough for her and replaced her friend, companion, assistant, and psychologist, the young, beautiful girl was just hungry for new acquaintances and a new, modern, comfortable life. Miranda let her go to town more and more often, but asked her to be quiet, cautious, and not to contact anyone. The girl spent her time at the movies, in cafes, and shopping malls. Fortunately, her mother was able to give her money for such entertainment, who threw quite a decent amount of money on her account every month. And she also wrote scientific papers and articles to order. One day it all happened. Kate made a friend, a guy named Alex. He was urban and a little older than her. Kate told her mother that she was going for a walk around the city alone, but she was in the company of a nice young man. When Alex found out that her friend didn't have a phone, he briefly bought her one as a gift as a token of friendship. When the mother found out such careless purchases, she became displeased, almost escalating into rage. "Kate, we agreed no cell phones." She was indignant. "But I'm an adult. Look, I have a different outlook on life. And what are yours? Tell me," Miranda asked in a mocking tone. "I think you can't hide from people. I don't understand why we've been doing this for so many years. I've explained it to you. We are being chased by people, dangerous people." By the way, Miranda had said a lot of things to Kate in those 7 years. A lot of things, often things that had nothing to do with reality. Once you deceive someone, it's easier to deceive them again. So there's a whole chain of lies being built up. Before Miranda knew it, this style of communicating with her daughter had become habitual. Here Kate, too, became dishonest and mature with her. She asked herself questions to which she could not find answers. And slowly it became clear to her. Miranda had been deceiving her for a long time. Lately, the girl had even become annoyed by her excessive concern for her. Constant warnings and advice that sounded like orders. Phrases, "I'm worried about you. You're my only family, and I wish you nothing but good things." Being always comforting, we kindly began to push her away. Dangerous people. What kind of people are these? Maybe you mean your daughter? Which daughter? Miranda, upon asking Kate about it, immediately realized that Kate meant her alcoholic mother. And she was quick to correct herself. "Anna, I was starting to forget that she was my daughter." This conversation had been on her mind for a long time. She did not understand how you could love your granddaughter and forget that you have a daughter. She now had even more distrust for the man she was living with. This whole picture of life was no longer comfortable and familiar to her. Kate, like a bird, wanted to jump out of this not at all golden cage and smell somewhere far away. More and more often she imagined her father, her brother, and her mother. Kate missed them. Kate began to see Alex more and more often. She was also taking English classes now, and she was both scared and pleased to finally feel socialized, where there were people her age, young female students, college students, and professors everywhere, who were all educated, interesting individuals. She finally had the opportunity to socialize and came to this decision on her own. Kate was cramped in a village where the most interesting entertainment was watching an old TV with 2 barely working channels. They met after the course and went outside to the park. They were out in the springtime. Beautiful people were watching the most lush blooming of nature. It was the beginning of May. Alex had heard some things about Miranda already and didn't always understand his and Kate's relationship. He was interested in his girlfriend's life and one day decided to have a serious conversation with her. "Kate, I got that right. She's not your birth mother. She's my grandmother. She once asked me to call her mom. I did. Don't you miss yours? I do. But if I leave too, she can't stand it. She once said if I left, I shouldn't come back. Kate, it's all manipulation. You have to realize that. What does that mean?" Kate read science fiction, of course, but the versatility of her communication was sometimes lacking. She didn't know many modern phrases, fashion trends. Alex was a savior for her in this world. Everything that seemed strange to the girl. For example, when watching a movie, she would check with her friend. "That means, Kate, she controls your emotions. She knows you feel sorry for her and pressures you to do so." "Yes, that's true. But what do we do?" "Do you want to see your family? I want to see my brother. I don't know if I want to see the people who ruined my childhood. Grandma, she saved me from them. But she stole you." This sudden conclusion Alex kind of shook Kate's mind. She thought for the first time that Miranda's act could, in fact, be considered kidnapping. Stolen, but she said it was best for me. "I was beaten, Alex. They drank. They were never interested. I understand. But you understand, too. She had no right to do that to these people." Kate that day was the first time she thought so deeply about the possible feelings of her first family. What if they're still hurting? What if they're looking for me? What if Grandma hadn't discussed anything with them? Alex's words were now unsettling, and it seemed he was right. Kate was determined to get her way. But how to make sure that her grandmother, to whom she owed a lot, would not be offended? One beautiful May evening, they had a conversation. Did Kate spend a long time going round and round? Yes, around, talking about how much she would like to see her brother Tim, but saw that her grandmother was not very willing to talk about relatives. "I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. Why didn't you take the subject with us? He's your grandson, too. He was a big boy. He wouldn't have gone. I talked to him. He made his decision. But why would you want to take away my ability to communicate with him?" "Kate, this is hard for me to talk about." Miranda realized that Kate was backing her into a corner with this kind of questioning. What was she to say about a teenage boy she had only seen a couple times? The woman's lies were amplified. The girl's curiosity grew more and more sophisticated. "I want to go to them. I'll go decisively." Kate cut Kate off. "No, that's not even up for discussion. You and I have talked about it. Won't you take me back? If I come, are you going to kick me out?" "No, no, no, no," emotionally shouted the woman. After a moment of calming down and catching her breath, she answered much quieter than before, as if to close the subject of all the girl's long-standing requests and complaints. "They're dead, all of them." That it couldn't be. Kate didn't get up from her chair, but it is. Miranda, sitting on the chair in front of the dining table, rested her face in the palms of her hands. She wasn't crying, she wasn't hiding her tears, as people who want their emotions not to be seen by those around them usually do. She was hiding the absence of tears. She was hiding the shame of another lie. Another 10 years passed. Kate was 25. At this age, she had to experience another of the most bitter losses of her life. Her own beloved grandmother had died, though she was personally surrounded by more and more secrets with each passing year. Kate loved her sometimes strange, sometimes cruel, but very loving and caring grandmother Miranda. By this time, the girl had already had a serious relationship with Alexei, the very guy who often spurred her to assert her rights in communication with her grandmother. As cynical as it may sound, but only after the death of Miranda, Kate decided to take the step that her beloved had been waiting for her for 5 whole years. She told him yes, and it was 2 days after the funeral. Miranda, still towards the end of her life, accepted Alex, because she realized the girl would need care and support. After all, except for her real grandmother and a young man, she had no one in this world. At least she convinced her of that. Kate, coming to the native cozy little house where she grew up and comprehended life through books. Communicating with her grandmother Miranda was happy and sad. She realized I was entering a new life, but something seemed to put her down. And it wasn't just the death of a dear and close person. Kate felt that the death of her grandmother did not close all her spiritual worries and eternal state of anxiety. Her heart was still out of place. Both mind and body had been calling to Kate always since the day of Miranda's death. And here she was, surrounded by objects and furniture that had once been so familiar to her. She had learned the roughness in the holes and birthmarks of each. Strangely, the girl caught herself thinking that she had never laid or even sat on her grandmother's bed. She slowly walked over to it and sat down on it. That dark green bedspread that her grandmother used to cover her bed with. That red patterned rug that always gave the house a special atmosphere and coziness so cheerful in the apartment. Those intricate figures on the carpet always brought the girl back to the past. Kate threw her head back and cried. She was to be married soon, but for some reason doubts were creeping into her soul. The girl didn't want to start a new page of life, not having sorted out the old ones yet. A lot of questions hung in her soul. What happened to her relatives? Why had her grandmother taken her so far away? And why was she only worried about her? By the way, wanted answers to all these questions. And those answers came. When she calmed down and wiped her tears away with her hand, she turned to the wall and saw something white between us. It was deeply hidden. And yet, as if on purpose, part of it was peeking through the gap. Kate tried to get it out, but failed. Then she found a pair of scissors in her grandmother's old jewelry box. The name she grasped the edge and pulled out the whole thing. It was a piece of paper folded in four. Having discovered an interesting find, the girl hurried with it to the light. She sat down by the window and unfolded the sheet. Kate immediately recognized the familiar handwriting. It was Miranda's grandmother's. Her hands were covered with cold, sweat, and even trembled slightly. She didn't know the contents of the letter, of course, and couldn't even guess what it would say. But for some reason, she felt that her life would change drastically after reading it. Kate read the following lines. Dear Kate, you know and see how sick I am. Every day could be my last. I try to see you more often, to see your smile and how happy you are. Yes, I want to tell you again, taking your Alex, there is so much I want to tell you right now, but unfortunately I am pathetic and cowardly. I only ask you for one thing. Let this be my last will and testament. Not, cursing me for what I'm about to tell you now. I'm not your grandmother, I'm not your mother, I'm nothing to you. But I loved you very much when I saw you on the playground. You were an angel to me then, and I'm an unhappy man. An unhappy woman who met betrayal, deceit, and pain along the way. I could never have children. The man I loved left me, and he and I lived together for 20 years. You appeared to me just at the moment when the darkness in my soul closed everything alive. I'm grateful for that, but I've been lying to you all this time. I saw how worried you were about your family. I know who left you with those bruises on your face and your body, and I so didn't want them to do it again. My heart is breaking with pain. I'm a liar. I stole you, I kidnapped you. They were looking for you. They were all looking for you, Kate. I know that. But the scariest, most important thing I lied about is that your brother, your mother and father, they're alive. Yes, they're alive. They're still living in Chicago. If you've forgiven them, and go there soon. Being a mother is the greatest value in life. I've experienced it because of you. Kate sat on the bed for a few minutes in a state of complete stupor. She didn't believe the words that were written on the piece of paper. She didn't want to believe that her grandmother had cruelly deceived her all these years. And at the same time, it was as if she had learned what she had longed to know, and all the secrets that had kept her in suspense were revealed. She, in general, got what she wanted, and now she was ready, probably to burn this message and erase in herself all memory to kill all desire to know the truth. The girl did not cry, which seemed strange to her. She tried to squeeze a single tear out of herself, but failed. Now her mind was dominated by the thought of going to her relatives. 3 days after the bitter discovery and the gap between the betrayed walls, she finally made up her mind. Kate had packed her backpack, had already written Alex a message. Alex, my family is alive. I'm going away. I'll be there in a few days or weeks. I'll explain everything. I'll tell you later. Kate sat at the small table in the kitchen where she had once had tea with her grandmother. She had decided that for the rest of her life, Miranda would be remembered as her own person. The resentment toward her lasted for a few hours, and later all that remained was pity. She took a seat on the path her things were already waiting for her in the hallway. The girl looked out the unwashed window at the courtyard. It would seem that she had waited so long for this moment. She had despaired so much when she learned of the death of her loved ones, and even regretted holding blackness in her heart for her mother and father. She had been so uplifted when she realized they were all alive, but something seemed to stop her from making this trip. It was hard for her to say, too. There's nothing you can do about it. When feelings bloom inside you, bad or good but they're all so ingrained in your head that every day, from waking up to falling asleep, you hear them, feel them, live with them, and a similar strong feeling came over Kate. She couldn't figure out what it was, fear or resentment or rejection. But it was strong behind the sea of energy, of feeling. She thought, whatever the deception was, everything that happened to me, from the moment I was kidnapped and moved away, led me to what is happening to me today. She was happy with Alex. Her soul and mind remained pure and not corrupted from city life. She looked at her watch. She had already missed the first bus of its kind.